He slid the divorce papers across a white tablecloth like they were a business card, casual. Inevitable, already decided. He had champagne chilling at the Carlisle. He had a flight to Monaco in the morning. He had a 24-year-old model named Camille Ricci waiting in his suite, and he had not one single doubt in the world that this was the smartest move he'd made all year. What he didn't have, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that the quiet woman sitting across from him, the one he'd spent 5 years treating like expensive wallpaper, was about to become the most dangerous person he had ever underestimated. By the time he figured out who she really was, his empire would already be burning, and she would be holding the match. If you want to see how completely a man can destroy himself when he mistakes silence for surrender, stay with me until the very end and drop a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. What up? The rain came in off the Hudson like it had a grievance, hammering the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maison Dorée in long silver sheets. Outside Manhattan went about its indifferent business. Yellow cabs blurred through intersection puddles, pedestrians hunched under umbrellas. The city's noise muffled to a low roar by 2 inches of triple-pane glass, and the soft, deliberate silence that money bought. Inside it was another world entirely. Maison Dorée occupied the top floor of a midtown building that didn't advertise itself and didn't need to. No sign on the door, no listing on any restaurant app. You received an invitation from someone who already had one, or you didn't come at all. The lighting was low gold, the kind that made everyone look either powerful or beautiful or both. The tablecloths were white as surgical gauze. The flowers were changed twice daily. The wine list ran to 47 pages, and the cheapest bottle on it cost what most people spent on groceries in a week. Ethan Rourke had a standing reservation in the corner booth. The private one half-screened from the room by an arrangement of potted olive trees for the first Friday of every month. He'd held that reservation for 11 years. It was one of his quiet status signals, the kind that didn't require him to say anything. The kind that simply announced, "I have been here long enough to belong." Tonight at 43, Ethan Rourke looked exactly like what he was, a man who had won repeatedly and publicly and had stopped being surprised by it. His suit was Brioni charcoal with a barely there chalk stripe. His watch was a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar that he'd bought himself after closing his first Pentagon contract, a reminder that time moved on his terms. His hair had gone silver at the temples in the last 2 years, which his publicist had suggested was distinguished, and which he'd discovered women liked more than the original, which struck him as an elegant arrangement. He had arrived 15 minutes early and ordered wine, a 2009 Burgundy, from a vineyard he part-owned, and he had reviewed one final time the documents his attorneys had spent 6 weeks preparing. They were thorough. They were fair, more than fair, actually. Michael Hayward, his lead counsel, had said so explicitly and with some apparent admiration. "You're being generous, Ethan. Genuinely." Ethan had nodded because generosity was important. Generosity was a form of control. You were generous when you could afford to be, and Ethan Rourke could afford to be extraordinarily generous with a woman who had no money of her own, no prominent family, and no particular leverage of any kind. $3 million. The Upper West Side apartment fully paid. No alimony claim, no litigation, clean and quiet. He glanced at his watch. She was 2 minutes late. That was unlike her, actually. Elise was almost pathologically punctual. One of the small, unremarkable qualities he'd catalogued over 5 years of marriage. She was always on time. She always said please and thank you. She always smiled at his colleagues' wives with a warmth that never quite reached her eyes. And she always disappeared into whatever book she was reading the moment he stopped paying attention to her, which was most of the time. He heard her before he saw her. Or rather, he heard the faint change in ambient sound, the slight hushing of nearby conversations, the particular quality of attention that moved through a room when something worth noticing had entered it. He looked up. Elise Vale walked through Maison Dorée like she did everything quietly. Gray dress. Modest neckline, no jewelry except her wedding band, which she was already twisting around her finger, that nervous habit that had irritated him since approximately the 3rd month of their marriage. Her dark hair was pulled back in the same uninspired arrangement she'd worn for as long as he could remember. She wore almost no makeup. She looked, Ethan thought, like a woman who had come to an appointment and was hoping it wouldn't take long. She slid into the banquette across from him with that particular grace she had unhurried contained like every movement was economical, and folded her hands in her lap and looked at him. "You're late," he said. "2 minutes." Her voice was soft, her accent, its usual ambiguous thing, not quite American, not quite anything else. A faint music underneath the words that had seemed exotic to him once 5 years ago when he had been in the mood for exotic. Traffic. "The Wagyu is already on order. 28-day dry-aged. You should eat something." "I'm not particularly hungry." He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. "Suit yourself." He let the silence breathe for a moment. He was good at silence, boardroom silence, the kind that made subordinates fill it nervously, that gave him the upper hand before a word was spoken. He watched Elise look around the restaurant with those dark, careful eyes of hers taking in the room without appearing to take in anything at all, and he waited for the nerves to show. She was always nervous. That had been endearing once briefly. "I wanted to do this here," he said, "because I thought you deserved somewhere appropriate, somewhere comfortable. This doesn't have to be a difficult conversation." Something moved through her eyes, quick gone. "That's very considerate of you." The slight flatness in her tone registered without meaning anything to him. He reached into his jacket and withdrew the envelope thick with the accumulated weight of 6 weeks of legal work and placed it on the table between them with the calm confidence of a man making an offer he already knew would be accepted. "I had my attorneys prepare everything. It's straightforward. The apartment is titled to you outright. $3 million in a separate settlement account cleared within 30 days of signing." He paused, letting the number land. "That's considerably more than most people see in a lifetime, Elise. I want you to understand that I'm handling this generously." She stared at the envelope. "I know this is a surprise," he continued, and even as he said it, he knew it was probably untrue she wasn't stupid. She'd seen the distance growing between them for years, but these things happen. Marriages run their course. You're a perfectly wonderful person. Don't. She said it quietly without heat. He paused. "Don't what? Tell me I'm perfectly wonderful and then explain why I'm not what you need." She looked up from the envelope, and for just a moment the soft steadiness of her gaze was unsettling. Not angry, not hurt. Something else entirely. Something that reminded him of the expression on a chess player's face when they're 3 moves ahead. "Just say what you came to say." He held her gaze. "All right." He picked up his wine. "I've been seeing someone. 3 months. Her name is Camille Ricci. She's 24. She models internationally. She was on the cover of Vogue Italia last month. We're not hiding it anymore. She's flying with me to Monaco tomorrow." He watched Elise's face and found only stillness. "She understands my world. She photographs well. She's exactly what my career needs right now. I'm closing deals in Vienna next month, the founder's gala defense contracts with European suppliers, the kind of rooms where image matters." He pulled out his phone and turned it toward her. Camille Ricci in a backless gown at some charity event, all dark hair and luminous skin, and the particular incandescence of youth that photographs like a lit match. Elise studied the photo for a long, silent moment. "She's very beautiful." "She is. And you've been sleeping with her for 3 months. "Yes." Another pause. Something worked quietly across her face, too fast to read. "And the Vienna summit. You said Schönbrunn Gala." "That's right. The founder's gala invitation only. The room that makes billion-dollar defense contracts look like handshake agreements. Camille will be perfect for it." He pushed the envelope closer across the white tablecloth. "Sign the papers, Elise. Take the apartment, take the money, walk away with your dignity. This is the cleanest possible outcome." She looked at the envelope for a long time. Then she looked up. "No." He blinked. The word landed wrong, like a note struck on a piano that no one expected to be there. "I'm sorry. No?" She said it again just as quietly, but there was something different about her now. Something in the way she was sitting, a slight shift in the angle of her spine, the particular stillness of a person who has made a decision and is no longer worried about the consequences of it. "I won't be signing those tonight, Ethan. I'd like to consult my own lawyers." His expression didn't move, but something behind his eyes tightened. "Your own lawyers." He said it the way one might say your own spaceship, with a patience edged in disbelief. You don't have lawyers. I'll find some. Elise. He leaned forward, and for just a moment the civility slipped, and he was someone else, the person he was in boardrooms, the one people did not enjoy disagreeing with. Don't make this complicated. You don't have resources for a legal battle. You don't have family money. You have exactly what I've given you over 5 years of marriage, which is a very comfortable life. And now I am offering you $3 million and a paid-off apartment, and the opportunity to start over clean. That is more than generous. That is extraordinary. He picked up the envelope and extended it toward her. Take this. She stood. She stood with a fluidity that was somehow wrong. Not the tentative unfolding he expected, but something contained and certain, like a door opening. She picked up her bag and straightened the strap and looked down at him with an expression he had genuinely never seen on her face before. Not defiant, not hurt, not desperate. Just steady. Keep the papers, she said. I'll be in touch through my attorneys when I've had a chance to review everything properly. She held the envelope out to him. He didn't take it. Several tables had gone very still. Ethan felt the weight of attention, the subtle reorientation of a room where people were accustomed to watching things that mattered, and something cold moved through him. He stood too, and he grabbed her wrist. Not gently. You don't embarrass me, he said low and controlled the kind of quiet that was louder than shouting. Not here. Not in front of people. You take this envelope and you thank me for treating you like an adult, or I will make the next 2 years of your life extremely difficult. I always win, Elise. You know that. I didn't build everything I have by losing. Monsieur. The voice came from behind him, French accented, carved from something harder than stone. Ethan turned to find Jean-Claude Beaulieu Maison Doré's maître, a silver-haired man of perhaps 60, who had managed this establishment for 31 years, and who now stood with 2 members of the restaurant's private security flanking him like a very elegant honor guard. The entire room was silent. You will release the lady, Beaulieu said, and his tone contained the absolute certainty of a man who had never once needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. Ethan's grip loosened involuntarily. He couldn't help it, there was something in Beaulieu's voice that simply commanded the way only a very few voices in the world actually did. Elise drew her wrist back slowly. She rubbed it once, very briefly. And then she looked at Ethan with those dark, quiet eyes, and the expression she wore was not what he expected. Not fear, not relief. Nothing that made him feel like he had won anything. It was something measured and final, like a door closing. Thank you, Jean-Claude, she said. The maitre d' inclined his head with a deference that seemed excessive, Ethan thought furiously for a woman in a department store dress. Of course, madame, your car is whenever you're ready. My car? Ethan looked between them. We came together. Your vehicle is also available, monsieur. Beaulieu's tone managed to convey without saying a word that the arrangement was not open to debate. I believe it is preferable that you depart separately this evening. Security had arranged themselves in a configuration that was not quite threatening and also left no route forward. Ethan looked at Elise one more time, at the steadiness of her, at the way she seemed to have simply settled into herself in a way she never had in 5 years of marriage, and something cold stirred in his stomach that he refused to identify. This isn't over, he told her. She said nothing, just watched him with those unexpectedly level eyes. He grabbed his coat from the booth and walked toward the door, and behind him he heard Beaulieu speak again. Madame, I must apologize for don't. Her voice still quiet, but different now. It isn't your fault, Jean-Claude. Some men simply never look closely enough to see what they're walking away from. He paused at the door without turning. He heard the maitre d' say something else, one sentence delivered in a tone Ethan had never heard directed at a woman in a gray department store dress, and then he heard Elise's response low and almost amused. He left without looking back. He was already texting Camille about the Monaco trip, already forgetting. He had no idea that behind him in Beaulieu's private office, his wife was making a phone call that would detonate his entire world. The restaurant's private office was small and lined with wine catalogs and a single framed photograph of Beaulieu shaking hands with a French president who had been out of office for a decade. Elise sat at the desk and stared at her phone and let herself breathe. really breathe the way she hadn't in 5 years. The way that came from somewhere deep in her chest that she'd learned to keep very quiet. Beaulieu stood in the doorway. "How long?" she asked without looking up. "Madame, how long have you known?" She raised her eyes to his. "That I wasn't who I appeared to be." A small pause. Something shifted in the maitre d's professional composure, not surprise, but the quiet movement of something confirmed. "Since your second reservation here," he said carefully. 18 months ago. You called under the Voss name just briefly, and I believe you meant for me not to notice." A faint, precise smile. "I spent 12 years managing Tile Event in Paris before coming to New York. I know the way old European families sound when they have decided to be invisible." Something loosened in her chest. "You never said anything." "It was not my place." His jaw tightened slightly. "Though tonight, what I witnessed tonight, if you wish to file a formal complaint with the police, there's no need." She looked down at her phone again. "But I would be grateful for 15 minutes alone." "Of course." He reached the door, then paused. "Madame, for whatever it is worth. Men like Monsieur Rourke understand only power. It is time he learned how little of it he actually possesses." He inclined his head. "The office is yours for as long as you require." When he was gone, the silence held everything. 5 years. 5 years of folding herself down, of wearing gray, of reading in corners, of pretending she didn't understand German when business associates switched languages, thinking she couldn't follow, of watching Ethan look through her at dinner parties the way you looked through a window at what was outside. 5 years of telling herself it was worth it, because love was supposed to be worth it. Love without the weight of a name. Love that didn't know what she was worth. Love that chose her plainly and simply for herself. And tonight he had slid papers across a table like she was a quarterly expense to be resolved. She unlocked her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't opened in 5 years. A number registered to a private exchange in Vaduz, Liechtenstein. The kind of number that did not appear in any directory. She pressed call. It rang 3 times. "Voss Hartmann Holdings, Office of the Principal." A woman's voice, professional, accented in German. Elise switched languages without thinking, the German rising up clean and precise through 5 years of dormancy, carrying in it the particular cadences of a childhood spent in Vienna and Zurich and the Geneva boarding school where young women of her family's station learned, among other things, exactly who they were. "Greta, this is Isadora. I need to speak with my mother." Silence. Then, "Miss Isadora, we were told under no circumstances. Plans change. Please connect me." A beat. Then, "One moment." The hold music was Bach the Goldberg Variations played by the Staatskapelle Wien, and the sound of it so unexpectedly made her eyes sting. She studied her reflection in the darkened window. Plain dress. No jewelry. Hair pulled back. Forgettable. Not for much longer. The music cut. "Isadora." The voice was what cold steel would sound like if it had been wrapped in velvet and educated at the Sorbonne. It was a voice she had heard in her earliest memories in board meetings and diplomatic dinners, and the particular silence of a study where decisions were made that moved markets. It was unmistakable. "Hello, Mother." 5 years. Marguerite Voss Hartmann let the number hang in the air like a verdict. 5 years of silence, and now you call. From New York, I presume. "Yes." "Your brothers have been managing the Eastern operations without you. Dominic nearly resigned twice. Felix simply refused to accept that you were gone, which has been its own particular exhaustion." A pause. "Your uncle attempted again to argue that succession should bypass your generation. We managed him." Another pause, ice-edged. "And you call it 5 years." Isadora let that land. Let it be what it was. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. Tell me why." "Ethan filed for divorce tonight." "The businessman." "Yes." Silence. The particular quality of Marguerite Voss Hartmann's silence was different from other silences. It had texture. It contained calculation, the way deep water contained currents you couldn't see from the surface. "I see. And what does he know about who you are?" "Nothing. He thinks he's divorcing a woman named Elise Vale with no assets and no family. He offered me $3 million and a paid-off apartment. Isadore's jaw tightened, like a severance package. Another silence. I imagine that was instructive. Very. And what do you want, daughter A, clean exit, or something else? Isadora stood and walked to the window. Below her, Manhattan burned in the rain, millions of lights, millions of lives. And somewhere in that maze, Ethan Rourke was already in his town car, already forgetting her, already on his phone to Camille Ricci, already certain he had won. He mentioned the Schönbrunn Founders Gala, she said quietly, in Vienna next month. He wants to attend. He's been trying to secure an invitation for the last 6 months' defense contracts. European titanium suppliers, the kind of deals that happen in those rooms. A pause. He wants to attend the Founders Gala. Her mother's voice had shifted, not quite amusement, but something close to it, cold and precise as a surgical instrument. And he has no invitation. None. He's been leveraging every contact he has. I see. Paper rustled. Marguerite was already making notes. And he has absolutely no awareness of who you are. None whatsoever. A pause. Then, what is your intention, Isadora? Walk away. Or, I want him to have an invitation. Isadora said it quietly, looking at her reflection in the darkened glass. The woman in the window had better posture than she'd had 20 minutes ago. Her chin was higher. Something in her face was different. Something that had been carefully folded away was unfolding now, and it was not soft. Full access. VIP. Bring the girlfriend. Let him feel like he's finally arrived at the table that matters. Silence. And then, Marguerite said, and then I want to be there. As myself. Isadora turned from the window. I want him to walk into a room full of the most powerful people in Europe and find me there. And I want him to understand in front of all of them exactly what he threw away. The silence stretched across the Atlantic. When Marguerite spoke again, her voice had lost its chill. Not warmth exactly. Warmth was not her mother's natural register, but something that had the shape of it. You always were my most careful child, she said. You planned everything, felt everything, hid it all. A pause. I worried when you left that you'd become too soft, that 5 years of ordinary life would sand down the edges that made you who you are. And I am looking forward to finding out. A beat. The invitation will go out from the Foundation's event committee within the week. Your Mr. Rourke will receive it as a surprise, a recognition of his rising profile in American defense manufacturing. He will never suspect our involvement. Another pause. The gala is in 4 weeks. That is time enough. Time enough for what? To bring you back. A pause. Come home, Isadora. Come to Vienna. Let me help you remember who you are. She felt something behind her eyes, heat pressure, and she fought it back with the practice of years. I'll be on the first flight tomorrow. Good. The word was clipped efficient, but she heard something underneath it that she had not heard from her mother in 5 years' relief. I will have Conrad meet you at the airport. And Isadora? A pause. Longer than the others. I am glad you called. Whatever led you there, whatever you were looking for, I am glad you found your way back. The family is not the same without you. After she hung up, Isadora sat in Jean-Claude Beaulieu's small wine-catalogued office for another 10 minutes, not moving, letting the reality settle over her like a tide coming back in. She had walked away from being Isadora Voss Hartmann, walked away from 3 centuries of industrial legacy steel foundries in Bavaria, rare earth mines in Chile, titanium, processing facilities spanning 4 continents, holdings that collectively represented somewhere north of 45 billion euros, a family whose name did not appear in newspapers because newspapers were for people who needed the publicity. She had walked away from all of that to be loved for herself. And tonight, the man she had chosen to love instead had offered her $3 million and asked her to be grateful. She stood, smoothed her plain gray dress, walked back through the kitchen where chefs nodded with the careful neutrality of people who saw everything and commented on nothing, and out into the restaurant where Beaulieu materialized at her elbow as if summoned. Your car is at the curb. he said quietly. And if I may, he paused, selecting each word with the precision of a man who understood their weight. It has been an honor, madame, even under these circumstances. I hope that the next time you dine here, the occasion is considerably more agreeable. Isadora smiled genuinely for the first time all evening. Charge tonight's dinner to my personal account, she said. Not his. Something moved in the maitre d's face. Are you quite certain Monsieur Rourke's account is— I am quite certain. She extended her hand and he took it with both of his, with the grave formal courtesy that Europeans reserved for people they understood to be important. He doesn't get to pay for the night he tried to discard me. Outside, rain still fell. A black Mercedes waited at the curb engine quiet, a driver holding an umbrella steady against the downpour. As she slid into the back seat, Isadora caught her reflection in the tinted glass and barely recognized what she saw. Not Elise, not yet Isadora again. Someone in between, someone becoming. Starting tomorrow, she thought, watching Manhattan slide past the rain-slicked windows. Everything changes. Starting tomorrow, Ethan Rourke is going to learn exactly what it costs to mistake a woman's silence for surrender. She was awake before dawn, moving through the Upper West Side apartment. His furniture, his art, his particular taste in neutral things, with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly how little of it had ever truly been hers. A carry-on bag. A few things that mattered: her real passport, issued to Isadora Voss Hartmann and expired 3 years ago, but being renewed tonight by the family's Zurich office. A first edition she'd bought herself at a Paris auction the year before she came to New York. The photograph from their wedding, not because she wanted it, but because she did not want him to have it. Her phone had been pulsing since 4 a.m., her mother's logistics team coordinating, the family attorneys in Vienna emailing documents, Felix, her younger brother, who had apparently been notified by their mother and was sending an escalating series of texts that ranged from, "Is it really true? You're coming home to— I cannot believe you let some American divorce. You please let me punch him too, finally. I'm serious. Call me the second you land. I've kept your room exactly as you left it, even the terrible plants that I watered for 5 years because I refused to accept you were gone." At 8 in the morning, her phone rang. An unknown New York number. She almost didn't answer. Something made her. Elise, Ethan's voice, and underneath the surface certainty of it, something she had never heard there before, uncertainty. It's me. Look about last night. I was harsh. The wine is the stress of the week, the timing that wasn't my finest. A beat. I'm prepared to adjust the settlement. 4 million. Same terms, everything else the same, you just need to sign by end of business today. She stood at the window and looked at the city she was about to leave. Why the generosity? I don't want this to get complicated. Translation. Someone had mentioned that viral footage of powerful men grabbing their wives at Michelin-starred restaurants tended to unsettle investors. I'll think about it, she said neutrally. Elise, please. My attorneys will reach out to— She hung up. Let him wonder. Let him sit with the discomfort of not knowing for 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week. It wouldn't matter in a month when his entire world rearranged itself without warning, but for now the small satisfaction of it was clean and cool as water. The car to JFK arrived at 9. As Manhattan pulled away behind the window glass, she felt something settle in her chest. Not peace, not yet, but the particular sensation of a decision made and locked. She had spent 5 years running from who she was. Time to run toward it. The private terminal at Kennedy handled her departure with the frictionless efficiency of places that understood money. No lines, no crowds, no curious glances. The family's Gulfstream G700 had been repositioned from Zurich overnight, a detail that told her without any commentary exactly how seriously Marguerite Voss Hartmann took her daughter's homecoming. She was asleep before they reached cruising altitude, exhausted by 5 years of being someone else. When she woke, the Alps were below her, pale and enormous, and Vienna was 2 hours ahead. Felix's latest text read, "Mother has scheduled a light welcome dinner for 12 people, and I am already tired on your behalf. Also, I finally killed your plants after year 3. I'm sorry. I gave them a lovely burial. There was a small ceremony. She laughed a short, surprised sound in the empty cabin and typed back, "Thank you for the years of watering. I owe you everything." His response came immediately. "You owe me the opportunity to watch this American implode from a safe but highly entertaining distance." That she replied, "I can absolutely arrange." 8. The convoy on the tarmac at Vienna International was 3 vehicles with diplomatic plates, 4 security personnel, and Conrad, who had been head of Voss Hartmann family security for 22 years, and who looked as he always had, like he'd been carved from a single piece of granite by someone who admired the military. "Miss Isadora." He inclined his head, precise and formal. "Welcome home." "Conrad." She descended the stairs into cool European night, breathing in the particular quality of Austrian air, clean and old, and carrying in it somehow the scent of centuries. "You look exactly the same." "As do you, miss. Though if I may—" He glanced at the gray dress. "That is not your usual standard." "No." Something like a smile. "That's going to change." The drive to Schloss Hartfeld took 40 minutes through Vienna's lit evening streets and out into the countryside where the family's ancestral estate sat on 200 acres of formally landscaped grounds, its 18th century architecture rising from the winter-brown gardens like a thing that had always been there and always would be. As the convoy turned through the iron gates, exterior lights came on in sequence, and the house she'd stopped calling it a palace at 21, in the particular teenage assertion of independence that now seemed very far away, looked the way it always had in her memory, impossibly large, impossibly old, impossibly certain of itself. Marguerite was waiting at the entrance. At 64, her mother remained the most formidable woman Isadora had ever met, slender, perfectly turned out at what was well past midnight in a navy suit that had probably cost someone's monthly salary, with the bearing of a general and eyes that missed nothing. She stood on the stone steps with her hands clasped, and she looked at her daughter for a long moment without speaking. Then, "You're too thin. That dress is hideous." A pause. "But you're here. Finally. I'm sorry it took this long." "Don't apologize." Marguerite crossed the gravel and pulled her into an embrace that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and old money and everything Isadora had spent 5 years trying not to miss. It was brief and fierce and completely unlike anything Ethan Rourke had ever made her feel. "Just promise me you're staying." "I'm staying." Her mother released her, stepped back, examined her with those precise assessing eyes. "Good, because we have 4 weeks and there is work to do." A pause, and then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of Marguerite Voss Hartmann's mouth curved upward. "And we are going to make your husband very, very sorry he ever confused your silence with weakness." As they walked together into the lit warmth of the house, Isadora felt the last of Elise veil fall away from her like a coat that had never quite fit like a skin she'd worn over her own. Ahead through the tall windows, Vienna glittered against the dark. He wanted access to this world, she thought. He wanted to sit at the tables where his billions are pocket change. "He told me I wasn't enough for it. I'm going to give him everything he asked for. And then I'm going to show him exactly how wrong he was about all of it." The first morning back felt like surfacing from water. Isadora opened her eyes and found herself in her childhood bedroom. Not a guest suite. Her actual room preserved in the careful amber of a space no one had touched in 5 years. Cream silk curtains. The antique writing desk positioned to catch the morning light. The wall of books arranged in the 7 languages she read without thinking, the window seat overlooking the formal rose garden. Even the framed photograph remained on the nightstand, 16-year-old Isadora between her brothers at some state function trying desperately not to laugh at something Felix had whispered. She lay still for a moment and let the familiarity of it move through her. "Miss Isadora." A soft knock. A voice she recognized immediately, Margaret, who had been with the family since before Isadora was born, and who moved through the house with the quiet authority of a person who had seen everything twice and been surprised by none of it. "Your mother requests your presence for breakfast in 30 minutes. Your wardrobe has been prepared." The wardrobe turned out to be a Dior suit in deep charcoal silk blouse heels that probably cost more than Ethan's watch jewelry, that cost more than the apartment he'd given her. Isadora stood in front of the mirror and watched herself come back from somewhere very far away. The posture first, then the set of the jaw. then something in the eyes that had been packed away and was now unpacking itself with quiet determination. There you are, she thought, and it wasn't vanity, it was recognition. Breakfast was in the morning room where Marguerite sat reading financial reports on a tablet and drinking espresso from a cup that appeared to be held together primarily by tradition and good breeding. She looked up as Isadora entered, assessed the outfit in one efficient sweep, and nodded. Better, sit. The table could have fed 10. It held pastries and fruit and cheeses and perfectly prepared eggs, all attended by staff who moved with practiced invisibility. Felix is in Bratislava, Marguerite said without preamble. Supply dispute at the eastern facilities. He'll be back by tomorrow. A pause. Your eldest brother, however. The door opened. Dominic Voss Hartmann was 6'2" and had their father's eyes and their mother's absolutely immovable certainty, and at 40 he still moved like a man who occupied whatever room he entered without effort or announcement. He had been the one Isadora knew who had been angriest when she left. Not disappointed, angry, the genuine cold fury of someone who loved you and felt your absence as a personal betrayal. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. He stopped in the doorway, looked at her. Something moved through his face too complex to name. You're actually here, he said. I'm here. He crossed the room in 3 strides and picked her up. Physically lifted her off the floor in an embrace that left no room for anything except the fact of it. And she felt against her better and most controlled instincts her throat tighten. You absolute catastrophe, he said into her hair. Do you have any idea what the last 5 years have been like without you? I'm sorry, Dom. Don't apologize. Just don't disappear again. He set her down, held her at arm's length, examined her with the frank appraisal of someone who had known her since birth. Mother says we get to dismantle an American businessman. Among other things, his expression sharpened with what she could only describe as professional enthusiasm. I have been looking forward to this since yesterday's phone call. Marguerite cleared her throat with surgical precision. Sit down, both of you. We have a great deal to cover and limited patience for sentimentality before 9 a.m. They settled around the table, falling into patterns that were both wholly familiar and strange with the weight of 5 lost years. Marguerite outlined the weeks ahead with the calm efficiency of a military commander who had already won the war in her head and was now managing logistics wardrobe consultations with designers flying in from Paris, legal briefings with the family's attorneys, foundation board meetings, lunches with family allies whose feelings needed managing, dinners with the extended circle of European industrial aristocracy that constituted Isadora's world. And through all of it, the schedule, the preparations, the careful machine of the family, reassembling itself around her return, one fact sat quietly at the center of everything. Ethan Rourke had accepted his invitation to the Schönbrunn Founders Gala within 3 hours of receiving it. He was bringing Camille Ricci. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The invitation went from the Foundations Committee, Marguerite confirmed, scrolling something on her tablet. He is listed as a distinguished American industrialist with significant European expansion interests. He will have full VYP access to all summit events. His name appears on the seating chart for the pre-dinner reception. She set the tablet down. He has been telling his associates in New York about it. Apparently he considers it a significant achievement. He's been trying to get into that room for 2 years, Isadora said quietly. Yes. Her mother's expression was the temperature of a high-altitude glacier. And in approximately 4 weeks he is going to walk through those doors and find that the most powerful woman in the room, and possibly the entire building, is the wife he tried to discard for $3 million. A pause. We have a great deal of work to do before that moment. Isadora looked at her mother, and her mother looked back at her, and between them passed the particular understanding of 2 women who had always known each other better than either had been comfortable admitting. Then let's begin, Isadora said. And the machinery of something vast and quiet and absolutely certain started turning. The wardrobe fitting lasted 4 hours, which was 4 hours longer than Isadora had spent thinking about clothing in the past 5 years combined. 3 designers had flown in from Paris. Marguerite had made the calls the night before in the small hours after Isadora's arrival, and they had arrived on the morning flight with assistants and rolling racks and the particular focused energy of artists who understood that certain commissions were not merely commissions. They set up in the estate's grand salon where morning light came in from three tall windows and caught the fabrics as they moved. For the first 2 hours, Isadora stood on a low platform and let the process happen around her, feeling oddly external to it, like watching something be built. Silk and velvet and brocade moved through her field of vision. Colors appeared and were dismissed too muted, too aggressive, too reminiscent of something that wasn't her. She wore measurements that were a half-inch different from 5 years ago in most places. Felix had been right about the too thin and the head designer, a severe Parisian named Celeste, who had the demeanor of someone performing a surgical consultation, had noted this with neither criticism nor delicacy, simply catalogued it and moved on. For the gala itself, 6 options were presented. Marguerite dismissed 5. Too modest, she said of the first, too contemporary of the second, too self-conscious of the third, and the designer opened her mouth to protest, saw Marguerite's expression, and did not. Too American. She didn't explain this and didn't need to, and too eager. She stopped at the 6th, a gold silk gown with strategic beading across the bodice, and hem, the beadwork designed to catch light in multiple spectra, so that the effect was less of wearing fabric and more of wearing atmosphere, of wearing something that moved with her rather than on her. This, Marguerite said, but modified. Higher neckline, the sleeves to here. She indicated Isadora's wrist. She needs to look completely unreachable, not beautiful in the way that invites approach, beautiful in the way that makes people understand they are not qualified to approach. Celeste studied the gown with her head tilted. Like a Winterhalter portrait. Precisely. The viewer should feel they ought to bow rather than speak. Isadora watched this conversation happen around her and thought not for the first time that she had spent 5 years in a world where no one talked about her like this. Like she was an instrument being tuned, a force being directed, and that she had found that absence liberating when she left, and found it now clarifying. There was something almost restful about being in the hands of people who understood exactly what she was and what she could be made to do. Jewelry, Celeste asked. The Voss diamonds, Marguerite said immediately. The full parure. Nothing from this century. I want her wearing history in a room full of people who think they can buy it. In the evenings after the day's preparations, which were relentless, deliberate, and oddly satisfying, Isadora began the harder work of repair. Her departure 5 years ago had not been clean. It could not have been clean. You did not walk away from a family of this magnitude without leaving damage behind you, without damaging the people who had organized their lives and work and expectations around your presence. The foundation board she'd abandoned, the charity gala she'd failed to co-chair, her cousin Elizabeth, whose wedding she'd been meant to stand in and who had not spoken to her since, her great-aunt Wilhelmina, 81 years old and the family's longest memory, who had taken Isadora's departure as a personal insult and had been making that point to anyone who would listen for 5 years. And there was Dominic's anger, which was complicated because it was the anger of someone who had loved her. And there were the business relationships that had frayed the succession questions that had swirled the year when her Uncle Carl had genuinely lobbied the family council to restructure the leadership model in a way that would have effectively written Isadora out of the picture. Marguerite had managed him, but the damage was real. People have long memories here. Dominic told her directly and without cruelty during a walk through the estate's grounds. On the second morning, the frost turning the formal gardens silver, their breath visible in the cold, the conversation happening away from the house, in the way that the most honest conversations in their family always had. Aunt Wilhelmina stopped speaking to Mother for 8 months after you left. She'd been preparing you for the foundation directorship for 3 years. Your cousin Elizabeth felt genuinely abandoned, and Uncle Carl, I know what Carl used it for. Then you understand what you're walking back into. He was quiet for a moment, their footsteps crunching in the frozen grass. I'm not trying to overwhelm you on your second day home. I'm trying to make sure you go in with clear eyes. Because you'll need to do the work, Sarah. You can't just reappear and expect the family to fold back around you like nothing happened. I know. She watched a bird land on the bare branch of a linden tree, consider the cold, and leave again. I'll make it right, whatever it takes, however long it takes. He was quiet for another few steps. Then, for what it's worth, and I recognize I've been making it difficult for you to believe this, I'm glad you're back. The family is better with you in it. A pause. Even if you did leave me to handle Carl's succession maneuvering alone for 5 years, which I will be bringing up at every family dinner for the remainder of my natural life. She laughed a short, surprised sound, and he smiled, and something that had been tight in her chest since her arrival eased by a small but meaningful degree. The reconciliation dinners were harder. Marguerite had arranged them with her characteristic precision, the right people in the right order, the conversation structured to allow for genuine exchange without tipping into recrimination. 3 days of lunches and dinners with cousins and great aunts and family allies each encounter a negotiation of its own. Aunt Wilhelmina was the most difficult, a tiny, upright woman of 81 who had survived a war and 3 economic crises and was constitutionally opposed to softness in any form. She received Isadora in the library of her own house 10 minutes from the estate and said nothing for the first 2 minutes, simply examined her. "You look better than I expected," she said finally, "and worse than you should." "Yes. You left." It was not an accusation. It was simply a record of fact, at the worst possible time, when you were needed. "I know. Do you—" Wilhelmina's eyes were still sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you understand what it means to carry a name like ours?" "Not the privilege. Anyone can understand the privilege. I mean the weight of it. The people depending on the decisions we make, the generations whose futures move on, what we do and fail to do." "I thought I could leave it," Isadora said carefully. "I thought I could find something that the name couldn't give me." "And did you?" "No." She met the old woman's eyes. "I found out that what I was running from was also in some ways what I was made of. I just needed to understand that they weren't incompatible." Wilhelmina was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandmother," she said finally, "left everything once. Did you know that she was 23? She moved to Salzburg and took a position as a music teacher and told the family she would not come back." A pause. "She came back within the year. She said she realized she'd been confusing the cage with the bird." The old woman looked at her steadily. "Don't make the same mistake twice." "I won't." Another silence. Then Wilhelmina picked up her tea and said in a tone that indicated the subject was concluded, "Marguerite tells me we are dismantling some sort of American businessman. Among other things." A very small, very cold smile. "Good. I always said the Americans were too sure of themselves." Felix arrived home from Bratislava on the 3rd day with a leather portfolio full of labor reports and the focused energy of someone who had been managing a foundry strike and was delighted for literally any other subject. He was 33, the youngest of the 3 siblings, and he moved through the world with a warmth that was Isadora had always thought genuine rather than performed. He was simply that rarest of things in their family's world, a person who actually enjoyed people. He had been when she'd left 28 years old and furious and deeply hurt, and he had channeled that into watering her dead plants and sending increasingly unhinged messages into the void. When he walked into the morning room and found her at the breakfast table, he stopped entirely. Then he crossed the room so fast she had barely stood before he had her arms and was pulling her into a hug that expressed with more clarity than words had managed everything the last 5 years had cost both of them. "Don't ever do that again," he said into her shoulder. "I won't." He pulled back. His eyes were bright. "The plants," he said. "Year 3. I tried so hard. They were already dead and I kept watering them. I couldn't stop." He paused. "I buried them under the linden tree. I'm not embarrassed about that." "I know. I saw the grave. I left flowers." "I know." They looked at each other, and the 5 years between them compressed and folded into something she thought she could actually carry. "Tell me everything," he said, pulling out the chair beside her. "And I mean everything, the whole Maison Dorée situation, the phone call with Mother, all of it. I want to understand exactly how stupid this man is so I can calibrate my expectations for Vienna." She told him. All of it. The restaurant, the envelope slid across the white cloth, the things Ethan had said with such absolute certainty the moment she had stood and said no. Felix listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him, and his face moved through a range of expressions that ended somewhere in the territory of cold precision she recognized from their mother. "He called you a palate cleanser," he said when she finished. "Yes." "In those words." "More or less." Felix was quiet for a moment, which was almost always a warning sign. "I want to be clear about something," he said finally conversationally. "When he walks into that ballroom and looks across the room and sees you standing there, does he get at minimum 30 seconds of complete incomprehension before anything is explained? That's more or less the plan. I want to be positioned where I can see his face for all 30 of those seconds. I'll make sure of it." His expression settled into something that was almost serene. "Good. Then I'm fully supportive of every element of this plan. Call it." The attorney briefings happened on day 4 in the estate's business wing, a set of rooms that would not have looked out of place in a very serious law firm, all glass and polished stone, and the particular quality of a space where decisions were made and documented rather than merely discussed. 4 lawyers from the family's primary European firm, led by Dr. Petra Weil, a sharp-eyed woman of 50 who had been the family's lead legal strategist for 15 years. Dr. Weil laid it out methodically, with the care of someone who understood that the facts were spectacular and the implications more so. "Your marriage to Ethan Rourke was conducted entirely under the name Elise Vale." She began spreading documents across the conference table. "That name has no meaningful legal connection to Isadora Voss Hartmann. From a legal standpoint, you are, as Elise Vale, precisely what Mr. Rourke believes you to be: a woman with modest means, a paid-off apartment she doesn't own yet, and no significant assets. And as Isadora Voss Hartmann," Dr. Weil allowed herself a thin, precise smile, "a slightly different picture. Your trust fund, frozen at your request 5 years ago, currently holds approximately 360 million euros in diversified instruments. Your shares in Voss Hartmann Holdings represent a voting equity stake valued at approximately 2.9 billion euros at current market pricing. You hold directorships on 19 company boards, including 3 with direct defense industry relevance in the EU. You have advisory roles on 2 government economic councils, and cite as trustee on 14 charitable foundations with combined endowments exceeding 800 million euros. She folded her hands. "In short, Miss Voss Hartmann, you are one of the 30 wealthiest women in Europe." "And Elise Vale," Dominic said from the corner, arms crossed with the tone of someone completing a mathematical proof, "is nobody." "Elise Vale is nobody," Dr. Weil confirmed, "which means Mr. Rourke's divorce filing is legally against the wrong person. He is attempting to divorce a woman who, in the eyes of European law, does not exist in any meaningful economic sense." A silence in the room. "We've identified 3 response strategies." Dr. Weil continued, clicking to the next section of her presentation. "Option 1, sign the divorce papers as Elise Vale, take the settlement, let him believe he won. Clean. No entanglement. You walk away free." Isadora said nothing. "Option 2, wait. Let the Vienna summit happen. Let the full revelation of your identity occur in public, and then pursue dissolution as Isadora Voss Hartmann, at which point the settlement terms reflect your actual marital assets, his documented misconduct, his affair, and the public humiliation of the incident, which we would use as evidence of a pattern of controlling behavior." Dr. Weil paused. "Given those factors, a court would likely award a settlement in the range of several hundred million." "I don't want his money," Isadora said. A beat of silence. "Then what do you want?" Marguerite asked, and the question was quiet but careful, the question of someone genuinely asking. "I want him to understand what he lost." She looked at the table, then up. "But I don't want to become what he is. I don't want to spend years building something that's only about what I took from him." "There's a third option," Dr. Weil said slowly. "One that is somewhat unconventional." Everyone looked at her. She opened another folder. "Blackwell Vanguard, Mr. Rourke's company, is privately held. It is not publicly traded. But it is highly leveraged. Mr. Rourke has borrowed aggressively against his equipment, his facilities, and his future contract revenue to fund expansion. On paper, the company is impressive. In reality, It is a structure that requires continuous deal flow and stable supply chains to service its debt. Remove either of those and the entire architecture becomes precarious. She looked up. We have reviewed his corporate filings. He carries approximately $340 million in outstanding debt obligations. That debt is held by a variety of creditors, banks, private lenders, two institutional investors. And if those debt positions were to change hands, Marguerite said slowly, then the new holders would have considerable influence over the company's future. Dr. Weil placed another document on the table. We are in a position to purchase those positions quietly through several layers of structure and to invoke acceleration clauses at a time of our choosing, combined with the supply disruptions we can create through our existing relationships with European titanium processors. She paused. Within 4 to 6 months of Vienna, Mr. Rourke's company would be in a position where it faces equity conversion or bankruptcy. At that point, we would offer to convert the debt positions to equity, at which point Voss Hartmann Holdings would become his majority shareholder. Another silence, longer this time. Not to destroy it, Isadora said quietly. No. No. She thought about this carefully. He built it. It employs people. It isn't the company's fault that he made it a weapon of his ego. She looked at Dr. Weil. We acquire it. We install proper leadership, we stabilize it, and we build something better out of it. Something that actually serves the purpose it claims to serve. A pause. And every day he sits in whatever role he's left with, he knows that the woman he offered $3 million to is the reason his company survived. The room was quiet. Then Felix, who had been sitting in the corner listening with his chin on his hand, said, That is genuinely the most elegant revenge architecture I have ever encountered, and I want you to know I'm fully committed to its execution. It isn't revenge, Isadora said. It's justice. There's a difference. The distinction is real, Marguerite said crisply. And it matters. Revenge is about what you take. Justice is about what you correct. We proceed. She looked at Dr. Weil. Begin the debt acquisition immediately. Shell structures nothing traceable to the family. I want it moving within the week. She looked at her daughter. And we will deal with the founder's gala in 3 weeks. The days fell into a rhythm. Morning's business. Marguerite reviewed operations reports with Isadora over espresso and pastries, refamiliarizing her with the complexity of what Voss Hartmann Holdings had become in 5 years and what it could still become. The operations had shifted more emphasis on rare earth metals, now less on steel fabrication, and a significant new position in rare earth processing facilities in Scandinavia that Christian had negotiated during her absence. Isadora's brain, dormant for 5 years on these matters, slowly woke back up, finding the patterns and connections she'd been trained to read since childhood. Afternoons, the repair work. Foundation board meetings where she sat and listened more than she spoke, allowing people to assess her return rather than presenting arguments for it. Lunches with cousins, some warmly received, some politely distant, a few openly skeptical. She didn't argue with the skepticism. She acknowledged it, answered it, sat with it. The way her father had taught her to sit with opposition before speaking to understand its architecture before you dismantled it. And evenings, mostly her mother. These hours were different from the others. In the evenings, Marguerite was not the strategist or the chief executive or the family's permanent presence of will. She was something more ambiguous, more human, a woman who had built an empire after the age of 24 because she had no other choice, who had raised 3 children in the cold amber of very old money, who had missed things along the way, and who knew it. I was unkind to you when you left, Marguerite said one evening in the library, glasses of brandy between them and the fire, doing the work that heating systems couldn't quite replicate in rooms built in 1741. Not in what I said, in what I didn't say. I understood why you left. I simply refused to tell you that I understood because I was too angry to offer you the comfort of being comprehended. Isadora looked at her mother's face in the firelight, the extraordinary severity of it, the intelligence, the thing behind the eyes that she had spent 30 years trying to understand and had never quite reached. You were angry. Of course I was angry. You left. You chose freely with full knowledge to walk away from everything we'd built for you, everything you'd been taught, and to do it for a man I'd never met. A pause. And I was afraid. That was the part I didn't say. Afraid of what? That I'd made it wrong. Marguerite turned her brandy glass slowly. That in building you into the person this family needed, I'd failed to build you into a person who could be happy. That you left because the life I'd prepared you for was unbearable. A pause. Was it? Isadora was quiet for a long moment. Not the life, she said finally. The weight of it. The way everyone looked at me and saw only the dynasty. I wanted someone to look at me and see me. Not the holdings, not the succession, not what I was worth. She paused. And instead I found someone who looked at me and saw nothing at all. Not even the plain woman he thought I was. Marguerite was quiet. Here's what your father would say, she said at last. He'd say that the right person doesn't ask you to diminish. They don't require you to be smaller than you are. They don't make you invisible to feel secure. He never, not once, in the 11 years I had him, made me feel like my ambition was a problem to be managed. She met Isadora's eyes. Harrison Rourke, Ethan, whatever his name is, he wanted a surface. He wanted something to stand next to that wouldn't challenge him. That's not a relationship, that's furniture. She set down her brandy. And you are many things, Isadora. But you have never been furniture. 10 days before the gala, a Federal Express package arrived from New York. Harrison Rourke's law firm's letterhead on the outside. The divorce papers again this time, accompanied by a cover letter noting that since Elise Vale had failed to respond to the original filing proceedings, would continue regardless, and that due to unnecessary delays and complications, the settlement offer had been reduced to $2 million. Isadora read it twice. Then she handed it to Dr. Weil, who was working from the estate that week. Draft a response, she said. Polite, professional, completely non-committal. Say I am reviewing the terms with legal counsel and will respond upon my return from Vienna. Dr. Weil was already reaching for her pen. That will infuriate him. Good. Isadora felt distantly the satisfaction of a particular patience. Let him be furious. He spent 5 years certain that I had no options. Let him spend 3 more weeks wondering why I'm behaving like I do. You're learning, Marguerite said from the doorway, with an expression that from her constituted warmth. "5 days before the gala, the dress arrived. Celeste had flown back from Paris for the final fitting, arriving with 2 assistants and the focused solemnity of an artist delivering something she considered significant. The modifications were complete, the neckline adjusted to the precise angle of dignity rather than display the sleeves, exactly as specified, the beading redone in a slightly tighter arrangement so that the light catching moved in waves rather than flashes, more controlled, more deliberate, more like water than fire. Isadora stepped into it in the grand salon before the tall mirrors, while 3 women attended to the last adjustments, and her mother and brothers waited with the quality of attention that important events gathered around themselves. When Celeste finished with the final fastening and stepped back, and Isadora turned to the mirrors, the room went quiet. The gown did what Marguerite had intended it did, not merely clothe her. It declared something. The gold caught the afternoon light and redistributed it. She appeared to be lit from within or from somewhere slightly above in the way that Renaissance portraits lit their subjects to suggest consequence. The Voss diamonds brought out for the fitting, the full parure not worn at this level in 5 years settled around her neck, with the weight of 1,789, their provenance visible somehow in the way they sat, the particular certainty of things that had outlasted empires. "Oh," Celeste said softly. And then, because she was French, and professionals did not say more than was required, nothing else. Felix, standing in the doorway, said, "Terrifying." And then when Dominic looked at him, "I mean that in the best possible way. Productive terror." Marguerite walked a slow, complete circuit. She examined every angle with the attention of someone for whom details were strategy. Then she stopped in front of her daughter and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. "Your grandmother," she said at last quietly, "sat for her portrait at 31. The one in the East Gallery, the one in white velvet at Schönbrunn before the First World War." She paused. She looked like someone who knew something that the room did not. Like power was not something she possessed, but something she was. She met Isadora's eyes in the mirror. That is what I see right now. Isadora looked at herself at the woman in the gold gown with the diamonds at her throat. The woman she'd been before Elise, and the woman Elise had never known existed, and felt something click into place. Not into the past, not back. Forward. In 4 days, Marguerite said, Ethan Rourke is going to look across a ballroom and see you. And he is going to understand in front of 500 witnesses that everything he believed about what he had and what he was throwing away was wrong. She paused. Are you ready for that? Isadora straightened imperceptibly. The last half-inch of spine she'd been storing somewhere for 5 years finally claimed. Yes, she said. Her mother's expression shifted by almost nothing, and yet everything it shifted toward was something Isadora had never seen there before: pride, unguarded, real. Then let's show Mr. Rourke exactly what happens when a small man mistakes mercy for absence. 2 days before the gala, a message arrived on Isadora's phone from an unknown number. Hey Elise, it's Camille. Ethan gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I just wanted to say there really aren't any hard feelings on my end about the divorce. I know these things happen. We're so excited to be in Vienna for this incredible event. The city is gorgeous. I hope you're doing well and that you find everything you're looking for. Lots of love. X. Isadora read it twice. Then she started laughing, a real surprised laugh, the kind she hadn't produced in longer than she could remember, and Felix, passing the doorway, reversed course and came back in. What happened? She held out her phone. He read the message. His eyebrows made a journey upward that they seemed to enjoy. She texted you, he said. She texted me. From the city where she's about to have her entire perception of reality restructured. He handed the phone back. I know she's collateral damage, but I want to note for the record that she has a very good energy, and I feel somewhat protective of her already. So do I, actually. Isadora looked at the message again. She doesn't know anything. He told her I was the ex-wife already separated, fully moved on. She thinks she's being kind. Felix's expression settled into something more serious. She's 24 and she's been told what she needs to believe by someone who's very good at doing that. Same as you were, just from a different angle. A pause. What are you going to say? Isadora typed carefully. Thank you for reaching out, Camille. Vienna is a beautiful city. I hope you enjoy every moment of it. Please take care of yourself. She pressed send before she could reconsider. Brief, kind, utterly opaque. The response came in 30 seconds. 3 strings of heart emojis, exclamation points. The digital equivalent of someone who did not yet know what was coming and was therefore very happy. Felix watched over her shoulder. She's genuinely nice, he said quietly. This is going to be hard on her. I know. Isadora set the phone down. I know. The day before the gala, Dominic returned from a 2-day trip to Berlin with information that rearranged several things. Rourke is nervous, he said, dropping into the chair across from Isadora and their mother in Marguerite's office. Our contacts at his New York firm are reporting a pattern of emergency calls to his supply chain managers. He's been trying to lock in titanium contracts before the summit, apparently concerned that his sourcing might be disrupted. He paused. Someone has been whispering in his ear that the landscape is shifting. Marguerite, who had not looked up from her documents, said mildly, How unfortunate. Mother. Isadora looked at her. What exactly? Nothing actionable, Marguerite said, still not looking up. We simply made it known through certain channels that Voss Hartmann was reviewing its supplier relationships and might be expanding its preferred vendor arrangements. A routine communication. If that happens to create a degree of anxiety in parties who depend on those relationships, that is hardly our fault. He doesn't know it's us, Dominic confirmed. He thinks it's market volatility. But the effect is that he will enter that ballroom tomorrow night already destabilized. Marguerite finished setting down her pen and finally looking up. Already worried, already off balance, which means when the confrontation comes, he will be operating from a position of existing anxiety rather than the complete confidence he would otherwise bring. She looked at Isadora. A man like Ethan Rourke, his arrogance is load-bearing. Introduce structural stress before the main event, and the reaction will be more volatile, more legible, more complete. More complete, Isidore repeated. He will not be able to modulate. He will not be able to perform the charming, controlled man he believes himself to be. He will simply break in front of everyone who matters, in the way that men like that break when the floor they've been standing on turns out to be glass. Silence. Tomorrow night, Marguerite said, rising and smoothing her suit jacket with the finality of someone closing a folder. You are going to walk into that ballroom and you are going to be exactly what you were born to be. Not for him. Not for the family, though the family will benefit. For yourself, because you have spent 5 years letting someone else define your worth, and that ends tomorrow. She crossed to Isadora and placed both hands on her shoulders, and it was the most maternal gesture she had made in as long as either of them could remember. Can you do it? Isadora thought about Elise Vale, about the woman who had worn gray and kept her hair back and smiled apologetically in rooms full of people who mattered, about the 5 years of trying to earn something that was never on offer, about a white tablecloth and a thick envelope, and a man's voice explaining with patient contempt that she was nothing more than a pause between better things. Yes, she said, and the word was very quiet and absolutely certain. Then tomorrow? Marguerite said, the corner of her mouth lifting by a single millimeter, we show the world exactly what he lost. Dubbed. The protocol briefing happened the evening before the gala conducted in the estate's smaller drawing room by Conrad and a woman named Annika, the family's diplomatic liaison for nearly 2 decades, who had the manner of someone who had managed crises in 12 countries and found most of them less difficult than people expected. They walked through every detail with the precision of a military operation. Arrival sequence, the family would enter the Schönbrunn Palace last after all other guests had assembled. Announcement protocol, full titles in order, Marguerite first, then Dominic Felix, then Isadora. The pause before her name deliberate the reintroduction of her to this world designed to land with the weight of a statement. Positioning on entry, the family would move to the center of the room, rather than the periphery establishing presence before any individual conversations began. Mr. Rourke and his companion will be guided on arrival to the eastern reception area, Conrad said, indicating a schematic of the gala's floor plan spread across the coffee table. Our contacts on the event staff have placed them in a sight line from the main entrance. They will see every arrival, which will keep Rourke attentive and expectant, but they will be on the far side of the room from your entry point. This gives you approximately 5 minutes after entry to establish yourself before he reaches you. Will he try to approach immediately? Dominic asked. Based on his behavior at the pre-event reception today, Conrad said, yes. Our people on the ground report that he's been networking aggressively all day, specifically asking other attendees about the Voss Hartmann family and expressing interest in an introduction. A brief pause that communicated something dry. He is apparently under the impression that securing a relationship with the family would significantly strengthen his supply chain position. Felix made a small sound that was technically not a laugh. He is correct, Marguerite said pleasantly, in a sense. Annika walked them through the moment of confrontation with the methodical care of someone who had stage-managed any number of impossible situations. The goal was not a scene, or rather the goal was a scene that happened on their terms, in which Isadora maintained complete composure, while Rourke did not, in which every witness in the room saw the power differential clearly and without ambiguity. The security team would be positioned to intervene if necessary, but would not act preemptively. When he sees you, Annika said, looking at Isadora with the directness of someone unconcerned with sentiment, he will likely experience a cascade of recognition. This will take 10 to 20 seconds. Your job during that time is to give him absolutely nothing. No acknowledgement, no softening, no signal that you see what he's processing. You treat him as you would any stranger who has been introduced. When he begins to break, and he will break, you maintain complete stillness. Let the room see the difference between you. And if he grabs her again, Felix said. The lightness was gone from his voice. Then security intervenes and the incident becomes a second piece of footage to add to whatever emerges from the evening, Conrad said calmly. We are prepared for that possibility. We are in fact somewhat prepared for it to happen given his behavior at Maison Dorée. Isadora said nothing. She was thinking about the bruise on her wrist that had taken 4 days to fade a small purpling ring she'd looked at each morning in the bathroom mirror, almost clinical in its evidence, almost useful in what it reminded her. You have one objective tomorrow night, Marguerite said, addressing her daughter directly. Walk into that room as Isadora Voss Hartmann. Not partially, not tentatively, completely. Every gesture, every expression, every word should communicate that you belong there more absolutely than anyone else present, because you do. She paused. This is not a performance. This is simply remembering what is true. Isadora nodded once. Then we're prepared, Conrad said, rolling up the schematic. The convoy departs tomorrow at 7:30. After Annika and Conrad had left after Dominic had gone to take a call about the Berlin operations, and Felix had retreated to his room with what he described as preparatory reading, Isadora found herself alone in the drawing room with her mother and the fire and the particular quality of the night before something consequential. Are you frightened? Marguerite asked, in the direct, uncalculating way she sometimes asked things when no one else was present. Isadora considered the question honestly. Not of him, she said. Not of the confrontation. A pause. Of not being able to hold it. Of the moment I see him and forgetting for a second that I'm not Elise anymore. Of the 5 years being closer to the surface than I think they are. Marguerite was quiet for a moment. Do you know what your father used to say about the first time he presented at the World Economic Forum? He was 31. He stood in the anteroom before his address, and he told me his hands were shaking. A pause. I asked him what he was afraid of. He said he was afraid the room would see through him, would see that underneath the suit and the preparation, he was still the boy who'd grown up in a family that nearly lost everything, who'd spent his 20s building something out of very little. Isadora looked at her. And what did you tell him? I told him that the room would see through him, but what they'd find underneath was exactly what he thought he was hiding. The hunger, the intelligence, the absolute refusal to be dismissed. And that those were the things that would command the room if he let them. Marguerite looked at the fire. You've spent 5 years making yourself invisible. You've carried Elise Vale so completely that part of you believes that's who you really are, the quiet, unimportant woman who tried so hard to be loved. She turned to look at her daughter. What you'll find tomorrow night is that she was never really you, and when the room looks at you, when he looks at you, what they'll see is everything you tried to hide, and it will be extraordinary. Isadora held that for a moment. Let it settle into the places that 5 years had left uncertain. I know, she said finally, and meant it in a way she hadn't fully meant it before. The morning of the gala arrived with crystalline winter light coming through the frost-edged windows of her childhood room, the kind of light that turned the frozen garden silver and made everything look like the beginning of something. She woke before dawn without an alarm lying still in the particular quiet of the house. Before it woke, and she did something she had not done in 5 years. She simply existed as herself for a moment in her actual room, in her actual life, without the maintenance of being someone else. She held the morning and the silence and the faint sound of the house settling around her in the way that very old houses settled, as if they were breathing. This is what I was running from, she thought. And this is what I was running toward, and they were always the same thing. Margaret appeared with espresso and a croissant at 6:30, and Isadora managed roughly half of each before the stylist arrived at 8, and the machine of preparation began in earnest. The hair required 90 minutes and 2 people. The makeup was administered with the focus of someone working on a canvas that had not been publicly exhibited in 5 years and required precision above all, not dramatic, not theatrical, but absolute. Each element contributing to the effect of a face that looked like it had never done anything other than exactly what it chose. Felix appeared at noon, took one look at the half-assembled effect, said, "You look like Consequence," and retreated. Dominic stopped by at 4 in his tuxedo already and stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking. "The night you were born," he said finally. "Father brought me into the room and said, 'This is your sister, and she will be the most remarkable person you know, and your job is to stand beside her when it matters.'" A pause. "Tonight matters." The dress arrived at 5, carried by Celeste herself, who had flown from Paris for the sole purpose of this final fitting. The room went quiet when Isadora stepped into it. The gold catching the late afternoon light and doing what it had been constructed to do, which was to make the person wearing it seem constitutionally incapable of doubt. Margaret brought the Voss diamonds at 5:30. Their weight around her neck felt like a crown. Their cold against her collarbone felt like being handed something real. At 6, she stood before the full-length mirror in her childhood room for the last time before Vienna, and the woman looking back was not Elise and was not a performance of Isadora. She was simply herself, all of herself, complete for the first time in 5 years. "Ready," Marguerite said from the doorway, already dressed in black and emeralds, extraordinary and absolute. Isadora turned from the mirror. "Yes," she said. That night, Isadora stood at her bedroom window for one final moment and looked out at the estate's grounds lit by moonlight and the careful ancient certainty of the house behind her. Somewhere on the other side of Vienna, Ethan Rourke was at the Imperial Hotel telling Camille Ricci how well things were going, feeling the particular pleasure of a man who believed he had arranged everything correctly. She pressed her fingers against the cold glass. Tomorrow she had thought the night before, and now it was no longer tomorrow. It was now. The convoy was waiting. The convoy moved through Vienna at 7:45, 3 black vehicles, with diplomatic plates cutting through streets that were bright and cold, the old city lit in gold against the winter dark. Isadora sat between her brothers in the second car and watched the city she'd been born in slide past outside, close enough to touch through the glass and very far away. "Breathe," Felix said. "I am breathing." "Deeper." "Felix, I'm just saying." Dominic on her other side said nothing, just rested his forearm against hers for a moment, the simple animal comfort of proximity. She was grateful for it in a way she couldn't have articulated. The truth was that she felt oddly distant from herself, not frightened exactly, but untethered, as if the person sitting in this car in this dress with these diamonds at her throat was someone she had not fully inhabited yet, someone she was still in the process of becoming. Elise Vale was 5 years of her life. 5 years was not nothing. You did not put 5 years on and take them off like a coat. They were somewhere in you, permanent now, part of the structure. "He's already inside," Conrad said from the front passenger seat, consulting his earpiece. "Pre-event reception. He's been working the room for 40 minutes. Our contact says he's been asking after the Voss-Hartmann family, specifically name-dropping his invitation, trying to position himself as someone the family would want to know." "Of course he is," Felix murmured. "The model is with him. Red dress, short striking. She's been photographed twice by Society Press already." Conrad paused. "He looks confident, relaxed." Dominic's jaw tightened slightly. "Good," he said. "Let him be relaxed." The Schönbrunn Palace rose before them as the convoy turned through the final approach. Baroque and gold-lit against the January dark, its vastness somehow both enormous and perfectly proportioned, the way things built over 3 centuries achieved a kind of inevitability. Crowds gathered behind velvet ropes on both sides of the arrival lane. Photographers' Society Press, onlookers drawn by the general phenomenon of important people arriving at beautiful places. Their car stopped. Conrad was out first. "Showtime," Felix said very quietly, and fixed his tie. And then they were moving. Dominic went first, and the camera flashes followed him. Then Felix, who offered a small, charming wave at the photographers that made 2 of them laugh. Then Isadora stepped out of the car into the cold January air, and the reaction was immediate. She heard it before she could process the individual elements, a shift in the crowd, a collective intake, the cameras accelerating, and she did what she'd been trained to do since the age of 14. She walked, not fast, not slow, with the contained certainty of someone for whom arrival was simply what happened when you came somewhere. Eyes forward, expression neither warm nor cold. The specific neutrality of someone who had never needed to perform importance because importance was simply what she was. Marguerite was at the top of the palace steps, waiting already assembled with the precision of someone who had made this entrance approximately 400 times and knew exactly what it asked of the person making it. She looked at her daughter descending from the car, and her expression did not change because it never did in public, but something behind her eyes shifted like a door opening. Together, the 4 of them, Marguerite, Dominic, Felix, Isadora, moved to the palace entrance, and the photographs that would appear in every European Society publication the following morning would show, without requiring any caption, a family who understood what they were. The ballroom was everything she had remembered and nothing she had been prepared to feel. Schönbrun's great ballroom occupied a space that made human beings understand physically and involuntarily the concept of insignificance. Crystal chandeliers the size of automobiles threw light across a marble floor that had been danced on by emperors. The ceiling was painted with scenes from classical antiquity that were technically very old and also absolutely certain of their relevance. The flowers alone, arranged by a firm that had provided flowers to this palace for 40 years, represented a quantity of natural beauty that most people would not see assembled in one place in their lifetimes. 500 people filled it with the particular density of a gathering in which everyone present was someone in which the ordinary social calculus of rooms had been replaced by something more complex and more deliberate. Conversations happened in German and French and English and Italian, and the occasional coded shorthand of people who had known each other for decades. The orchestra Strauss, naturally played by a chamber ensemble from the Staatskapelle, was somehow audible beneath it all. Isadora stood in the entrance for 3 seconds, and took it in this world, the one she'd been born into, the one she'd fled, the one she'd always terrified and fascinated her in equal measure, and she felt it settle around her like recognition. This is the room, she thought. This is where it ends. Positions, Conrad murmured. They moved to the family's designated area near the room's center. Not the perimeter, not a corner, the center, and began to work. Marguerite led, introducing Isadora to contacts with the practiced fluency of someone restoring a connection that had been interrupted rather than severed. Each handshake carried the same subtext. She's back. She's here. The question of her position is settled. For 20 minutes, Isadora did this without looking across the room. She knew he was there. She could feel it somehow. Not him specifically, but the altered atmosphere of his presence, the way attention in certain parts of the room had a particular quality, the hum of someone performing. She kept her back to that section of the ballroom and talked with the Belgian ambassador about rare earth supply chains and the Swiss investment director about infrastructure bonds, and an elderly Hungarian industrialist about the philosophy of legacy, which he found fascinating and which she found genuinely interesting. She felt him approaching before she heard him. It was a shift in the room's attention, heads moving, conversations pausing fractionally, the social tracking that a crowd performed on a person they were watching. And then his voice carrying that particular quality. She had spent 5 years pretending not to notice the tone of a man who had decided in advance that he was the most interesting thing in whatever room he entered. I'm sorry to interrupt. I've been hoping to be introduced to the Voss Hartmann family all evening. Ethan Rourke Blackwell Vanguard out of New York. He had moved to Marguerite, who was nearest. What a remarkable event. Mr. Rourke, Marguerite said smoothly, extending her hand. We received your correspondence about titanium supply arrangements. Welcome to Vienna. Isadora did not turn. She finished her sentence to the Belgian ambassador, thanked him, and let a pause of 3 natural seconds elapse before she turned the way she would turn for anyone. Ethan Rourke looked objectively good. The tuxedo was excellent. Someone had dressed him well. His silver temple hair was perfectly arranged. He had the easy physicality of a man who'd never had reason to doubt his own attractiveness, and beside him stood Camille Ricci in the red dress that had seemed striking in the hotel and looked in this company like a costume too bright, too short, too eager to be seen. He was shaking Felix's hand, then Dominic's. He was saying something about the summit's significance for American-European industrial cooperation, and his voice was doing what it did, confident, measured, performing a version of himself that had worked so reliably for so long that he'd stopped being aware it was a performance. And this, Marguerite said with the exquisite timing of someone who had prepared the sentence for weeks, is my daughter, Isadora. His eyes moved to her. She watched him process. In the first second, polite attention, the standard recalibration any person performed when introduced to someone new, taking in the face, the dress, the diamonds, assigning a social location. Important something in his assessment would have noted automatically. Someone. In the second, something shifted. His eyes stayed on her slightly too long. His expression remained pleasant, but the engine behind it changed gears, moving from automatic to manual, working harder. She could see his brain doing what brains did when confronted with information that almost resolved into something familiar. "Pleasure," he said, and extended his hand. "Your family's reputation is extraordinary." She took his hand. "Welcome to Vienna, Mr. Rourke." And she watched very carefully, very quietly, with the contained stillness of someone who had been preparing for this. For 4 weeks, she watched the recognition come. Not all at once. In stages, the way very large things revealed themselves. First the voice, which was wrong for a stranger and right for someone he knew, but in a different register than he expected. Lower, more precise, carrying in it no trace of the 5 years she'd spent softening it to something American and unobtrusive. Then the eyes, which were familiar, but not in any context he could immediately place. Then something in the angle of her jaw, the set of her mouth, the particular economy of her expression. She saw the exact moment it broke through. His hand, still holding hers, tightened involuntarily. His face, she would not forget his face, went through 4 expressions in rapid succession: confusion, impossibility, a kind of vertigo, and then the specific horror of a man who has just understood that the ground he thought he was standing on has not existed for longer than he knew. "Nora." The word came out strangled, barely audible, a sound forced through a throat that had stopped cooperating. She withdrew her hand slowly, deliberately. "I'm sorry," she said. "You—" He looked from her to Marguerite to Dominic, his face cycling through what she recognized as the early stages of a man who had never in his adult professional life been genuinely ambushed. "You can't— This is there a problem, Mr. Rourke?" Marguerite asked with the pleasant, careful tone of someone asking a question whose answer they fully anticipated. "This is my wife." His voice had climbed. Several nearby conversations stopped. "This is Nora. My wife Nora. We've been married for 5 years. I filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. I don't understand what—" He gestured at Isadora, at the dress of the diamonds, the family, the entire impossible architecture of what he was looking at. "What is this such—" Camille Ricci, who had been smiling at Felix for the past 45 seconds, stopped smiling. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Isadora said with the precise, pleasant neutrality she'd been practicing since she was 16, the register that conveyed nothing except quiet certainty. "My name is Isadora Voss Hartmann. I haven't been married a beat. Not under my name." The caveat was deliberate. A door left ajar. She watched him walk through it. "You—" He started forward, and she saw the movement coming, the reaching for her arm, the physical assertion of a man whose sense of reality was dissolving and who was defaulting to the tactic that had worked in the restaurant, and Dominic stepped forward at precisely the same moment, placing himself between them with the quiet completeness of a door closing. "Mr. Rourke?" Dominic's voice was the temperature of deep water. "You will not touch my sister." Conrad appeared at Ethan's shoulder with 2 members of the security team. 500 people in the ballroom had by this point stopped pretending to have conversations about other things. "Harry," Camille's voice small and uncertain. "What is happening right now? You told me you were divorced. You said—" "It's complicated." His voice had gone flat, the tone of a man buying time he didn't have. He was looking at Isadora with an expression she would think about later in the quiet, trying to find the right word for it. It was not anger exactly. It was the expression of someone who has realized in a single, unbroken moment the full cost of something they did not theoretically, not abstractly, but physically, visibly in the faces of everyone watching them, understand it too. "I think," Marguerite said, moving the room with the gravity of someone who owned the floor they were standing on, "that this conversation requires a more private setting. Step in the library, please. My family will join you shortly." Ethan looked at the exit. He looked at Conrad. He looked at the 500 witnesses whose phones were— He seemed to become aware of this progressively, like surfacing several of them filming. "Fine," he said. The word came out broken. "The library." As Conrad and his team guided Ethan and Camille toward a side passage, the ballroom erupted, not in sound, not quite, but in that particular charged hum of a room processing something that will be discussed for years. Marguerite turned to Isidora with an expression of absolute composure. "You were magnificent," she said quietly, for her daughter's ears only. Isidora's arm hurt, where she'd braced against the near grab. She rubbed the wrist once and straightened. He almost... But he didn't. Dominic was there. Her mother's eyes were steady. "Now, we finish it, Dad." The library was the palace's smaller withdrawal room. Leather-bound volumes lining walls that had absorbed 300 years of private negotiation oil paintings of faces that had overseen the birth of modern Europe, looking down from their gilt frames with a patience that suggested they had seen considerably more alarming things than this. Ethan Rourke stood in the center of the room like a man who had been dropped there from a height. Camille sat near the fireplace with her hands in her lap, very still, looking younger than 24 in a way that made Isidora's chest tighten. Dr. Weil was already waiting. She had positioned herself in an anteroom and entered behind the family, carrying her leather portfolio with the unhurried certainty of someone who had prepared for exactly this. The door closed. "Explain." Ethan's voice stripped now of every performance, raw and cracking at the edges. "Someone explained to me how my wife is standing in the Schönbrunn Palace claiming to be someone I've never met." "Mr. Rourke," Marguerite said, settling into a chair with the authority of someone for whom every chair was a throne by right. "My daughter is not, and has never been, anyone's wife under her legal name. What she may have chosen to do under other circumstances using other identities is entirely her own business." Other identities. He said it like the words had no meaning. "Her name is Elise Vale. We met at a Literacy Foundation event 5 years ago. We dated, we married, we have been sharing an apartment on the Upper West Side, and 3 weeks ago I filed for divorce." His voice climbed. "I have a marriage certificate. I have 5 years of joint tax returns. This is not a matter of interpretation." "Dr. Weil," Marguerite said pleasantly. The attorney stepped forward and opened her portfolio, laying documents on the library table with the efficient grace of someone presenting evidence that had been organized for this exact moment. 5 years ago, Dr. Weil began, her voice the temperature of precise clinical observation. "A woman using the name Elise Vale attended a charity event in New York and met you there. She had no significant assets, no prominent family connections, and no social profile of consequence. You began a relationship and subsequently married. All of this is factually accurate." She paused. "The woman you knew as Elise Vale is in legal reality Isidora Marguerite Voss Hartmann, who is standing before you. She adopted an assumed identity for personal reasons. Miss Voss Hartmann is the principal heir to Voss Hartmann Holdings, a privately held conglomerate with assets currently valued at approximately 45 billion euros. Doctor. Well, laid a photograph on the table Isidora at 17 at a European Economic Forum in formal dress unmistakable. She is a board director of 19 companies, a trustee of 14 charitable foundations, and holds advisory positions with 2 EU government economic councils. The color did not drain from Ethan Rourke's face, so much as drain from everything about him, his posture, his certainty, his fundamental orientation toward the room. "That's not..." He stopped, started again. "That's not possible." "I assure you it is both possible and documented," Dr. Weil said. He looked at Isidora. She looked back. "You lied to me." He said it very quietly, not accusing, processing. "Yes." She didn't soften it. "I lied about my name, my family, my background, and my financial situation. I wanted to know if someone could love me without knowing what I was worth. I wanted one relationship that wasn't shaped by my family's name." She held his gaze. "And I learned that you couldn't love me at all, not as Elise, not as anyone. You made that perfectly clear when you arranged divorce papers over a restaurant table like I was a contract you decided to exit. You should have told me." "To what end?" Her voice, still quiet, had an edge she didn't bother filing down. "So you could love me for my bank account instead of my personality. So you could have used my family's connections the moment you realized they existed. You were leaving Elise because she wasn't useful enough. What exactly entitles you to know about Isidora?" He was silent. "Harry." Camille's voice from the corner, young, steady, despite itself, the voice of someone who had been hurt before. and had decided, apparently on the spot, not to compound it with silence. You told me you were divorced. You said your marriage was already over before you met me. You said, Camille, please. You told me. She stood. Her eyes were bright, but her hands were steady. You made me feel like we were building something real. You brought me here to this city, to this party, to show off to people like them. She gestured, encompassing the Voss Hartmans, the library, the palace, and you were still married. Her voice broke on the last word, not with grief, but with a kind of clear-eyed fury that was more dignified than tears. She looked at Isadora. I didn't know. I need you to know that I didn't know. I know, Isadora said gently. This isn't your fault. I'm sorry, Camille said, for whatever that's worth from someone you've never met. I'm sorry. She picked up her bag. Harry, I'm going back to the hotel. She moved toward the door and Conrad opened it for her with the quiet deference of a man who understood without being told that she had earned it. Don't call me. The door closed behind her. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silence before. Ethan Rourke stood in the center of a library in the Schönbrunn Palace, surrounded by the family of the woman he had discarded with 50 witnesses outside, and several of them filming, and his expression had settled into something she had never seen on his face in 5 years' genuine reckoning. What happens now? He asked. And it was the most honest question she had ever heard him ask, stripped of strategy of performance, of the confidence that had always been load-bearing for him. Marguerite rose. Now, Mr. Rourke, you leave Vienna tonight. Conrad will escort you to collect your things. A car will take you to the airport. I suggest you return to New York and prepare yourself for what follows. The divorce will proceed on terms that reflect the reality of the situation, which is considerably different from what you initially proposed. She smiled, and the smile was cold and precise and absolute. You offered my daughter $3 million. I look forward to discussing what she'll require from you. He looked at Isadora one final time. The processing in his face had slowed into something more terrible comprehension. Not just of what he'd done tonight, but of what he'd done across 5 years, the accumulated weight of every dismissal, every small cruelty, every moment he'd looked through her to whatever he thought was better. The woman I thought I married, he said slowly. Elise. She was real. She was. Isadora's voice was very quiet and very certain. She was completely real. She was just never in 5 years enough for you to see. She paused. That's your failure, Ethan, not mine. Conrad and his team guided him toward the door. He walked like a man moving underwater, the particular dazed locomotion of someone whose entire model of reality has just been revised without warning. At the door he stopped, and she thought for a moment he would say something more, something that would require her to respond. And she was glad when he didn't. The door closed. The room exhaled. You're shaking, Felix said, appearing at her side with the sudden concerned efficiency of someone who'd been watching for exactly this. A little. She pressed her hands together, briefly steadying them. I thought I'd feel victorious. Something more than tired. The triumph comes later, Marguerite said, and the line carried a precision that suggested she knew it from personal experience. First comes the letting go, then the exhaustion, then eventually the satisfaction of knowing it was right. She placed a hand briefly on her daughter's shoulder. But right now we go back into that ballroom. We finish the evening. We show everyone out there that nothing that just happened required us to retreat. That's what you do, isn't it? Isadora said. Every time, no matter what happened in the room before. It is. Her mother's expression held something unguarded in it for just a moment. Something real. Welcome back to it, my darling. Truly. They returned to the ballroom together. Marguerite, Dominic, Felix, Isadora. And the room's reaction was immediate and readable. 500 people reorienting the gossip already metabolized into genuine fascination, the story still being processed. Several people looked at Isadora with expressions ranging from sympathy to awe to the particular calculating respect of people who understood power and had just watched a significant demonstration of it. She talked to people. She drank champagne she barely tasted. She smiled at things that were genuinely funny and remained composed at the things that weren't. She found the Belgian ambassador again and finished their conversation about rare earth supply chains properly, and she talked to a young Austrian economist about infrastructure investment. And she spent 20 minutes with a German industrialist she'd known since she was 12, who took her aside and said very quietly, "We are all very glad you've come back, Isadora. Very glad indeed." At one point, Felix appeared at her elbow. "The footage," he said very low, "is already on 3 major social media platforms. Someone filmed the whole confrontation in the ballroom, the near grab, Dominic stepping in the security, all of it." She closed her eyes briefly. "How bad?" "It's... he doesn't come out well. The comments are not kind to him." A pause. "But you..." Felix's voice shifted into something warm and something proud. "You look exactly like what you are. Every second of it. The camera found you, and you gave it nothing, just that face, perfectly still, perfectly certain. It's..." He seemed to search for the word. "It's historic, actually." She was quiet for a moment. "And Camille..." She left the hotel within an hour of the incident. Someone photographed her getting into a car with a single bag alone, no Rourke in sight. The comments are sympathetic. Good. And somewhere over the Atlantic, a man who had believed he understood the full shape of his world was beginning in the long, cold hours of a transatlantic flight to understand how wrong he had been about everything. The gala continued. The orchestra played. The chandeliers threw their ancient imperial light across the marble floor, and in it, Isadora Voss Hartmann danced with her brother Felix when he held out his hand and she closed her eyes for one bar of the waltz, and felt for the first time in a very long time the specific lightness of not having to be anyone other than herself. It was not triumph. It was something better than triumph. It was simply true. The video hit 47 million views before Ethan Rourke's flight touched down at JFK. Isadora watched it go viral from the morning room at Schloss Hartfeld. Felix beside her with his laptop open, tracking the spread in real time with the focused energy of a man who had been waiting years for an evening he found personally satisfying. The footage was less than 2 minutes. Whoever had filmed it had caught the moment from an angle that showed everything with unsparing clarity. Ethan approaching the Voss Hartmann family group, the handshakes, the introduction, the specific quality of the pause before recognition came. Then his face, the cascade of understanding, and then his voice rising, his hand reaching Dominic's step forward. Security materializing Camille's bewildered expression, and through all of it, in the corner of every frame, Isadora still composed the gold dress, catching the chandelier light. The diamonds settled at her throat, her expression giving nothing away except the absolute certainty of someone for whom the room had never been in doubt. "The comments," Felix reported scrolling, "are..." He paused. "They're calling you everything from the most elegant woman in Europe to an actual historical event. Someone started a thread explaining who the Voss Hartmann family is, complete with Holdings history, the full 300 years. It's been shared 400,000 times." He looked up. "People are also making a great number of pointed observations about the contrast between a woman who inherits a 45 billion euro dynasty and a man who tried to pay her off with $3 million and an apartment he'd been planning to take back anyway." She leaned over and looked at the screen. The comments were yes, not kind, not to him. "There's some who think I was playing games," she said, reading, "that I was dishonest, that he had a right to know." "There are always some," Felix said. "They're the minority, and the majority of them are people who have never been in a situation where the only way they could be loved was to pretend to be nothing." He closed the laptop. "Let them think what they want. The people who understand, understand." By the second day, the professional fallout had begun. 3 of Ethan Rourke's board members issued a joint statement requesting an emergency review meeting to discuss recent events and their impact on company reputation and investor confidence. His largest institutional investor, a Singapore-based infrastructure fund that had been one of his earliest and most significant backers, released a one-sentence statement noting it was reviewing its position in light of developing information. The titanium contracts he had come to Vienna to secure did not materialize. European suppliers who had been whispering about supply disruptions for 10 days discovered suddenly that their capacity was allocated elsewhere for the foreseeable future. His Pentagon contacts sent carefully worded emails expressing interest in maintaining the relationship while noting they would need assurances of operational stability before confirming upcoming contract renewals. On day 3, Camille Ricci posted a video. Christian, who had been managing operations in Munich and had been monitoring the situation remotely, forwarded it to Isadora with a message that read simply, "You need to see this. Also, I like her." Camille had filmed it in what looked like a Vienna hotel room, simple, unglamorous. Wearing a cream sweater and almost no makeup, looking younger than 24 and more real than any photograph of her Isadora had ever seen. Her voice was steady. Her hands were folded. She spoke for 3 minutes and 7 seconds. She had met Ethan Rourke 3 months ago, she said. He had told her his marriage was over, that he and his wife had mutually agreed to separate, that the divorce was a formality. He had made her feel like she was the person he'd been waiting for. She had believed him. She had flown to Vienna believing they were building something together, and she had walked into a library in the Schönbrunn Palace and discovered that nothing he had told her was true. "I want to say something to Isadora Voss Hartmann," Camille said near the end, and Isadora, watching in the morning room, sat forward slightly. "I said I was sorry in the library. I mean it. Not because it helps anything, I know it doesn't, but because she deserved better than to have me as part of what was done to her. And honestly," a pause, "so did I. I deserved better than to be used as a prop by someone who saw me as an upgrade." Her jaw set. "I hope you build something extraordinary. You looked like you were going to." Felix, watching over Isadora's shoulder, said, 14 million views in 6 hours. And then quietly, "She's going to be all right, that one." "She is," Isadora said. And then before she'd fully decided to, she picked up her phone and typed Camille Ricci's name into the search field. In New York, Ethan Rourke walked into the most difficult meeting of his professional life, the Blackwell Vanguard conference room. 34th floor view of Manhattan that he'd always used as a subliminal argument for his own competence held 7 of his 9 board members arranged in a configuration that told him everything he needed to know before anyone said a word. Gerald Hutchins, his oldest investor, and the first person who had ever written him a significant check, sat at the center of the table with his hands folded and the expression of a man who had eaten through a great deal of patience over the past 72 hours. "We need to discuss judgment," Gerald said, without preamble, without the preliminary civility that usually opened these meetings. "Specifically yours." Ethan had prepared a response to this. He'd spent 13 hours on the plane preparing it a controlled account, a measured explanation, a reframing of the Vienna incident as a private matter that had been inappropriately made public. He had the words ready. What he hadn't prepared for was the particular quality of the silence in the room, the sense that the words he'd been rehearsing had already been evaluated by people who'd seen the footage multiple times and discussed it among themselves and found insufficient. "The video," Patricia Chen, his second longest-serving board member, said, "all of us have seen it, several times. You grabbed a woman, your wife, as it turns out, hard enough that her brother stepped between you, in front of 500 of Europe's most connected business figures, at an event that you were attending to build the professional relationships this company needs." Her voice was perfectly even, and she paused briefly. "Is the heir to a 45 billion euro industrial conglomerate whose family controls 40% of the global titanium processing market. I didn't know who she was." "That is precisely the problem," Gerald said. "You didn't care enough to know. You treated a person with complete contempt without bothering to understand who you were treating that way. That is not a personal failing that exists in isolation from your professional role, Ethan. That is a character issue, and character issues in a chief executive become company issues." "We've lost 3 titanium suppliers in 48 hours, Patricia said, setting a document on the table. 2 more have requested contract renegotiations on terms we're not going to like. Our Pentagon liaison has been making careful noises about delivery schedule assurances. Our Singapore fund has been on the phone with legal." She looked at him directly. "We are looking at the beginning of a cascade failure, and it all traces back to the same origin point. The emergency meeting lasted 4 hours. It did not go well. He left it with an ultimatum: 60 days to demonstrate supply chain stabilization, a public statement of accountability and movement on the divorce settlement, or a no-confidence vote that would remove him from his own company. He went back to his office and sat at his desk for a long time, looking at the Manhattan skyline that had always seemed like evidence, like proof of something, and felt it mean nothing in particular. He called Michael Hayward his attorney. "They're destroying me," he said. "The Voss Hartmans are using their supply chain influence to systematically dismantle my business. I need you to make them stop." Hayward was quiet for a moment. "Ethan, I need you to understand something. Your leverage in this situation is zero. Exactly zero. You initiated the divorce. You were conducting an extramarital affair while doing so. You physically grabbed your wife on camera in a room full of witnesses. Any legal action you attempt against the Voss Hartman family will be reviewed by judges who have seen that footage." A pause. "Your only viable strategy right now is to give Isadora Voss Hartman whatever she asks for, and pray she's generous." He was silent for a long time. "What if she's not generous?" he said. Hayward didn't answer immediately. "Then we do our best," he said. "But, Ethan, the way she handled herself in that library, the way she handled herself in the ballroom, she's not a woman who does things carelessly." A pause. "If she wanted to simply destroy you, she'd have started already." The settlement proposal arrived 3 weeks after Vienna, a document that had clearly been constructed with the careful intention of a person who had thought deeply about what justice actually required. Isadora wanted nothing from Ethan personally. No alimony, no share of his private assets, no financial compensation for 5 years of marriage. She wanted access to Blackwell Vanguard's financial records, full disclosure of debts and obligations, and the right of first refusal on any equity stake that might become available. "She wants to buy into my company," Ethan said, staring at the documents. "It's almost generous," Hayward told him, "given what she could ask for." "She's not being generous." He said it slowly, the understanding arriving in stages. "She's positioning. She wants inside the company, not for the money, for the leverage." A pause. "She wants to own a piece of what I built, so I have to look at her name every quarter when the reports come in." Hayward said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. "What's in the company's books that we don't want her to see?" Hayward asked. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the truth he'd been managing around for 2 years, leveraging forward, always relying on deal flow to cover the structural debt he'd been accumulating, was that Blackwell Vanguard was beneath its impressive surface, a company that had been borrowing against its future so aggressively that any sustained disruption to its revenue would be existential. And the disruption had already started. Outside, somewhere in the corporate architecture of 3 continents, positions in his company's debt were quietly changing hands. He didn't know that yet, but he would. Back in Vienna, Isadora received the news of Blackwell Vanguard's board meeting from Felix's morning briefing with the same controlled quiet she had applied to everything since the gala. She read the summary, set it aside, and went back to the foundation committee meeting she had been preparing for. She had not yet told her family what she had decided about Camille Ricci. She would when the time was right. When the machinery of what they had set in motion had run a little further, and the smoke had cleared enough to see what was underneath. For now, she had a foundation board to run a 300-year-old industrial empire to learn again from the inside, and a quiet, patient certainty that everything she needed was already in motion. She had been invisible for 5 years. She was done being anything less than what she was. The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday in March, 11 weeks after the gala. Both parties appeared by video conference before a New York judge who reviewed the case materials with the focused attention of someone who had read a great deal of documentation and formed clear opinions about its contents. Ethan appeared from his Manhattan apartment looking like a man who had been sleeping poorly for 3 months, thinner, more careful in his movements, the particular economy of someone managing exhaustion. Isadora appeared from the estate's study in a navy suit, her hair pulled back, her expression professionally neutral. The judge ran through the terms with efficiency. Marriage dissolved. No alimony from either party. Assets divided according to what each had brought in, which favored Isadora comprehensively. Settlement terms including the access to Blackwell Vanguard's financial records and the right of equity purchase accepted by both sides. "Mr. Rourke, do you agree to these terms?" Yes, Your Honor. Flat. Mechanical. Miss Voss Hartman, do you agree? Yes, Your Honor. Then by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I hereby dissolve the marriage between Ethan Rourke and Isadora Voss Hartman. The judge paused, a deliberate pause, not bureaucratic but chosen. He looked at Ethan through the camera. Mr. Rourke, I'll note for the record that the materials in this case make for instructive reading on the topic of how we treat people we claim to love. Another pause. Court is adjourned. The screen went dark. Isadora sat in the study for a moment and looked at the blank monitor and waited to feel something definitive. What she felt instead was a vast, clean quiet, not emptiness but completion. The absence of a weight she hadn't fully understood she was carrying until it was gone. The door opened. Felix, with a pot of espresso and 2 cups, sat down across from her without ceremony. Done, he asked. Done, he poured. They sat in silence for a minute, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. How do you feel? He said. I thought I'd feel more. She turned her cup slowly. Instead, I just feel like something that needed to be finished has been finished, like closing a document you've had open for too long. That's not the worst way to feel about it. He leaned back. Mother's arranged a family dinner tonight. Nothing formal, just us. She looked at him. Just us. Margaret is cooking. Dominic is coming back from Munich. Christian's been in Vienna all week, as you know. Mother has already specified that the wine will be the good Burgundy, but that conversation about the divorce or Rourke or the company situation is absolutely forbidden for the duration of dinner. Isadora laughed, a short, genuine sound. She specified topics. She sent a written agenda. He slid a paper across the table. Permitted discussion, topics, childhood memories, current foundation work. Felix's disastrous second date last month and the question of whether Dominic's new dog is too large for the apartment he insists on keeping in Berlin. She looked at the paper. It was entirely real Marguerite's handwriting, precise and unhesitating. She actually wrote this. She actually wrote it. He raised his cup. To the end of something that should have ended sooner. And to you specifically for the incomparable satisfaction of watching that man's face in the Schönbrunn Palace on January the 9th. She raised her cup. To that, she agreed. That evening, the 4 of them sat around the smaller dining table in the estate's family wing, not the formal dining room with its 12 chairs and its portrait of their grandmother, but the room where they'd eaten as children, where Margaret had kept the kitchen warm and the conversations loud and the laughter unguarded. The table was set without ceremony. The wine was exactly what Felix had said, and for 3 hours, they were simply a family. They talked about things that had nothing to do with Ethan Rourke, about the summer they'd spent at the Italian property when Isadora was 8, and Dominic had convinced her that the lake was less cold than it was, resulting in an entirely predictable outcome. About the state of Felix's romantic life, which Felix defended with great spirit. About Christian's dog, a Bernese mountain dog named Atlas, who had been described to Isadora via photograph over the past week, and who was apparently very large and very earnest. About the Foundation's new initiative, which Isadora had been working on since her return, a workforce development program aimed at manufacturing communities in economically depressed regions of Central Europe, something she'd been sketching in her notebooks for years and had never had the platform to build. It's the most genuinely useful thing we've done with the Foundation in a decade, Christian said. I mean that as both a compliment and an indictment of the last decade. The board had some concerns about deviation from the historical charitable focus, Isadora said. The board's concerns were noted and addressed, Marguerite said mildly. At length. She was in that meeting for 4 hours, Felix told Isadora. Aunt Wilhelmina herself called it the most comprehensive persuasion I have witnessed since the Treaty of Rome. That seems like an overstatement. Aunt Wilhelmina does not overstate, Dominic said. This is one of her defining characteristics. The evening ran late, and by the time it ended, Isadora walked back to her childhood room, feeling lighter than she had in months. Lighter, she thought, than she had in years in the specific way that came from being fully known by the people around you and choosing to stay anyway. She was where she was supposed to be. Not because she had run back, because she had come home. In the weeks between the divorce and the takeover, Isidore rebuilt in two directions simultaneously. The family operation expanded outward, demanding and absorbing board meetings. Foundation worked the infrastructure of a 3-century-old empire that had been managed without her for 5 years and needed to adjust to her presence. She sat in meetings where she was the youngest person in the room by a decade and contributed to them with a precision that gradually over the weeks shifted the room's orientation toward her in the way that rooms always shifted when they understood where the intelligence was. She had been trained for this. The training was still there underneath everything, and it was coming back the way deep memory came back. Not gradually, but in sudden, complete returns, whole systems of understanding available again without effort. But she was also building something new. The workforce program she'd been calling it Heartfelt Works in her notebooks. Though the formal name was still under discussion, was the thing that got her out of bed before dawn. It had started as an idea, a sketch in margins of financial reports. Use the family's manufacturing infrastructure, not just to produce, but to train to give people in economically hollowed-out industrial communities in Austria and the Czech Republic and Slovakia a genuine pathway into high-skill work. Not charity. Work. Apprenticeship certifications, partnerships with technical schools, a pipeline from distressed communities into Voss Hartmann's own facilities. The board will have concerns, Dominic told her, reviewing her initial proposal on a Wednesday morning, sitting across the desk in the estate's business wing. The board will have concerns, she confirmed, and I am going to address them by demonstrating that companies with robust workforce development programs have a 32% lower attrition rate and measurably better supply chain reliability. She slid a second document across the desk. I had the research team run 3 years of comparable data. It's compelling. He looked at it. You came to this meeting prepared. I come to every meeting prepared. He smiled the smile that said he was genuinely proud of her rather than performing the sentiment. Yes, you do. A pause. Mother is going to love this. She would never say so in those words, but she's going to love it. Marguerite received the proposal at dinner that evening, read it over 2 hours, and appeared at breakfast the next morning, saying, "The materials cost projections in Section 4 are conservative. Revise them upward by 15% and the business case becomes stronger, not weaker. The program's value proposition doesn't depend on it being cheap." This was from Marguerite Voss Hartmann, a rousing endorsement. The Foundation Board approved the initiative 6 weeks after Isidore's return, with modifications she had largely anticipated and accepted with grace. Aunt Wilhelmina, who had been prepared to oppose it on the grounds of operational distraction, read the research section and changed her vote without comment, which everyone understood to mean she found it rigorous. The therapy question came from Felix, of course. They were on their habitual morning walk through the estate grounds 3 weeks after the divorce, the late winter giving way to the first tentative gestures of spring snowdrops in the formal garden, the linden trees beginning to consider the decision to leaf again. Felix had his hands in his coat pockets and the expression of someone who had been building toward a sentence for approximately 10 minutes. "I have something to say," he announced. "I know. You've been moving very fast since you came back. Every day is full. Every meeting has an agenda. You haven't really stopped yet." He glanced at her. "The things you felt in that marriage, the 5 years of making yourself small, of being loved wrong, those things don't resolve themselves because you've taken apart his company." She was quiet. "I'm not saying you're wrong about anything," he continued. "I'm saying that grief doesn't care whether you were the one who deserved to be grieved. You loved him at some point, or you loved what you were trying to build, and it turned out to be nothing. That's something to feel properly before you put it somewhere." She walked for a while without answering. The truth was that he was right. The pace she'd kept since returning had been at least partly about the specific relief of not having time to be still. When she was still, she felt the 5 years not as a coherent narrative, but as accumulated moments. The particular quality of being invisible in your own home, of watching someone look through you at dinner, of the gradual understanding that you had bent yourself into a shape that was not yours, and that the bending had not been rewarded. "I know," she said. "Are you? I'm not all right yet, but I am better than I was, and I will be." She looked at the gardens coming back from winter, patient and inevitable. "I needed to learn that I can't find myself by hiding. I needed to understand that who I am isn't a cage. It's just what I am. A pause. I ran away from it and got lost in something small. Now I'm home, and that's real. Felix pulled out his phone and sent her a contact. I have the name of a very good therapist in Vienna. She works with people who've had to rebuild themselves after. He paused, significant disorientation. Also, she once told me I over-explained things as a defense mechanism, which was accurate, and uncomfortable, which means it was useful. Call her. Isadora looked at the contact on her screen. I will, she said. And she meant it. The debt acquisition ran its course quietly, and then it ran its course less quietly. For 8 weeks after the divorce, shell companies with names that meant nothing were purchasing positions in Blackwell Vanguard's debt portfolio banknotes, private lending instruments, 2 institutional tranches that had been held by parties who found the Voss-Hartmann offer unusually attractive. The purchases were staggered, structured, and visible against the noise of a market in which debt changed hands daily. Ethan's CFO flagged the pattern on a Thursday in April. The terms are changing, Rebecca Martinez told him in her office on the 34th floor, spreading printouts across the desk in the arrangement of someone showing a problem's full shape at once. 60% of our outstanding debt has changed hands over the past 8 weeks. Different vehicles, different timing, but the pattern is it's coordinated. She met his eyes. The new holders are invoking acceleration clauses. Full repayment or equity conversion in 90 days. Ethan looked at the printouts. He'd known at some level that something was happening, the sense of ground shifting, of doors closing before he reached them, but seeing it laid out in documents made it real in a different way. Who's behind it? I can't trace it directly. The structures they're sophisticated. Multiple jurisdictions holding company layers, she paused. But the timing, the coordination, the way it aligns with the supply chain disruptions, it's the Voss-Hartmanns. He said it without heat, almost without inflection. The cold certainty of someone who had known without wanting to know. I can't prove it. You don't need to prove it. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the Manhattan skyline that had always promised him something and was now simply there, neutral, indifferent to what was happening in the office behind it. They disclosed the right of first refusal clause in the divorce settlement. I thought... He stopped. I thought they were establishing precedent for the future, in case we ever went public. Instead, Rebecca said carefully, they were establishing the legal basis for a debt conversion they were already planning. Yes. He was quiet. What are our options? She laid them out with the efficiency of someone who had been through this mentally several times already. Raise capital, possible in theory, almost impossible in practice, given their current reputation with the investor community. Service the debt from operations, impossible. The acceleration clauses had compressed the timeline to a point where revenue couldn't support it. Accept the equity conversion, surrender control of the company, possibly ownership. If we accept the conversion, she said, the new debt holders become shareholders. At 60% of our total debt, they'd hold majority. He said the word like a door closing. Majority. He sat with that for a long time. Then we accept the conversion, he said. There's no other option that doesn't end in bankruptcy, and I am not watching this company file for Chapter 11. He picked up the printouts and set them back down again. Get our lawyers to make the conversion terms as favorable as possible. Negotiate board representation management continuity. My retention in some capacity. A pause. I'm not walking away from nothing. I'm keeping a seat at the table. Rebecca said nothing. Her expression said what she was too professional to say, that the seat at the table was exactly what he was going to be offered, because that was how this had been designed from the beginning. The new board members materialized within 2 weeks of the conversion. Professionals' impressive credentials drawn from the German and Austrian industrial establishment in a pattern that would have looked random to anyone who didn't know what it meant. The board chair was a woman named Katrina Hoffmann, German 52, who had restructured 3 major European manufacturing companies and who sat in the chair at the head of the conference table with the absolute ease of someone in exactly the right place for exactly the right reasons. She spoke to Ethan with the specific courtesy of someone who respected what he had built and had no particular interest in what he thought about what would happen to it next. The first board meeting under new leadership lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, Ethan understood the full shape of what had happened to his company and what would happen next. The decisions that had been made, supply chain restructuring, management changes, strategic reorientation, were not arbitrary. They were careful and specific and built on a knowledge of the company that could only have come from someone who had been studying it for a very long time. He made it through the meeting. He made it through the building's lobby. He made it into his car before he called Michael Hayward. "They knew everything, Sal," he said. "They had 3 months of due diligence before the divorce settlement was even signed. The clause, the right of first refusal, that wasn't a future provision. It was the settlement of a deal they'd already made." "Yes," Hayward said quietly, "and there's nothing I can do." A pause. "Not legally?" "No." A longer pause. "Ethan, I need to be direct with you. Everything that has happened to your company in the last 4 months is a direct consequence of choices you made. The divorce terms you offered, the way you conducted yourself in Vienna, the way you've structured this company's finances for the past 3 years. These people didn't create your vulnerabilities. They simply found them and used them with considerable skill." A pause. "I don't say that to make you feel worse. I say it because understanding what happened accurately is the only basis for moving forward." Moving forward. He said the words flatly. "The company will survive under new ownership. Your role will be reduced, but you can rebuild credibility over time if you make better choices." A very long pause. "Go to therapy, Ethan, genuinely, not as a PR move." He almost laughed. "Is that legal advice?" "Consider it professional development." But the final meeting happened on a rainy Monday in April. Ethan arrived at Blackwell Vanguard's offices 30 minutes early, habit reflex. The last vestige of the belief that being there first meant something. The conference room had been rearranged. His customary seat at the head of the table was occupied by 3 chairs on the far side, arranged with the quiet authority of a disposition of forces. At 9 o'clock precisely, the door opened. Marguerite entered first navy suit, the bearing of someone who sat in this chair, in the sense that every chair she sat in was a throne by prior claim. Then Dominic, tall and contained, carrying a portfolio, with the ease of someone for whom this was simply Tuesday. And then Isadora. She wore white, a tailored suit that made her look, Ethan thought, like a verdict. Her hair was swept back. Her expression was the same controlled neutrality she had offered him in the Schönbrunn library, professionally pleasant, revealing nothing. He stood because he had been raised to, because some muscle memory predated everything else. "Mr. Rourke," Marguerite said, settling into the center chair, "thank you for your time." "Did I have a choice?" "Not bitter, just honest. Not a great many know," Dominic said, opening the portfolio with an efficiency that communicated how brief this meeting was going to be. They walked through it quickly. Voss Hartmann Holdings, through its investment structures, controlled 68% of Blackwell Vanguard's equity. The company would be renamed. New management was already in place effective today. His role advisory. No operational authority. An annual retention of $200,000 office space consultation rights without veto. "You could refuse," Christian said in the tone of someone completing the picture. "In which case your departure is immediate, your severance is contractual minimum, and you leave a company with no connection to your name to rebuild without you." He looked at Isadora. She looked back. 5 years. The restaurant table. $3 million slid across white linen like an invoice. "You did this to punish me," he said. Not an accusation, a question. "No." She leaned forward slightly. "If I had done this to punish you, I would have shut it down, liquidated the assets, scattered the contracts, removed every trace of the name, and started fresh with nothing of yours in it." She held his eyes. "Instead, I'm rebuilding what you nearly destroyed through arrogance and keeping it running and employing the people who work here and building something sustainable out of the wreckage of your financial ego." A pause. "That's not punishment. That's what someone does when they care about something that you were planning to ruin." He looked at the contract in front of him. He signed it. His signature looked different from what he remembered. Smaller, more careful, the handwriting of someone for whom certainty was no longer a given. "The press announcement will credit your role in founding the company," Marguerite said, standing collecting the signed document. Your continued involvement will be described as strategic consultation. Your departure from day-to-day operations will be framed as a planned transition. She met his eyes. That is more dignity than you showed. Consider it a lesson in what generosity actually looks like. They turned to leave. I meant it, he said. They paused. When I said I loved her. He looked at Isadora. Or I thought I did. Whatever version of that was real. I thought it was real. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said finally. Or rather, I believe that you believed it. But what you loved was a surface. You loved someone who didn't challenge you, didn't occupy space, didn't require anything from you except that you show up occasionally and accept the gratitude of being chosen. She paused. That's not love. That's convenience. And now you'll have years to learn the difference. She offered him a small final smile, not warm, not cold, simply real. Goodbye, Ethan. I'll see you at board meetings. The door closed behind them. He sat alone in the conference room of a company that no longer belonged to him, in a building that now operated without his direction, with the Manhattan skyline outside the window, watching his particular version of the American dream revise itself into something he hadn't planned for. He had wanted to upgrade his life. Instead, he had discovered that the woman he'd thrown away was the most extraordinary person he had ever known. And unlike most discoveries, this one came with no recovery path, just the long educating work of understanding exactly how wrong he had been about everything he thought he understood. 6 months after the takeover, Isadora stood in what had been Ethan Rourke's corner office on the 34th floor of the Blackwell Vanguard building, soon to be renamed. Soon to be physically rearranged. The wall of framed magazine covers and award plaques already removed the space stripped back to its essential geometry. Glass and sky, and Manhattan churning below, and watched moving crews pack up the last of his personal effects. Conrad was in Vienna. Felix had come with her for the New York portion of the transition, and he appeared in the doorway now with 2 coffees, wearing the expression of a man who found proceedings satisfying. He's downstairs, Felix reported, in his old office. Security says he's been there for 2.5 hours. She accepted the coffee. Moving slowly. Like a man memorizing, like he keeps stopping to look at things and then can't quite leave them. He came and stood beside her at the window. Should you go down? She considered it. She had seen Ethan exactly 4 times since the gala, at the 2 board meetings held during the transition, where he had sat at the back of the table and said almost nothing, watching the company he had built move on without him, with an expression that she found, not without some internal complexity, genuinely difficult to observe. He had looked each time a little more diminished. Not broken, she didn't think Ethan Rourke was the kind of person who broke cleanly, but reduced, compressed the specific appearance of someone for whom the world had rearranged itself into a shape they had not prepared for. No, she said. Let him have his goodbye privately. It's more than he gave me, but that's not a reason to withhold it. Felix was quiet for a moment. You're being kinder than you need to be. I'm being exactly as kind as feels right. She turned from the window. Which is different. The transformation of Blackwell Vanguard into what would become Voss Hartman Industrial Americas, the American subsidiary of the larger restructuring the family had been planning since her return, was proceeding with the focused efficiency of people who had thought it through carefully and were now executing. New management was installed, led by a woman named Andrea Fischer, whom Christian had recommended from the Munich operations, and who had spent her first 2 weeks in the building learning every job title and every person's name. Supply chain relationships mysteriously liberated from their difficulties once the ownership change became official were not merely restored but expanded. The defense contracts were renewed on terms considerably more favorable than Ethan had managed. The workforce development program had been one of Isadora's conditions for the name change. Before the rebrand, she had required a 3-year commitment to establish Heartfeld Works programming in 3 American cities, partnering with community colleges and technical schools to build the same pipeline in distressed Midwestern manufacturing communities that she was building in Central Europe. The commitment had been made without significant resistance, which told her something about the difference between leadership that understood long-term value and leadership that could not see past the next quarterly report. The press release is ready, Christian said, video calling in from Vienna. his image appearing on her laptop with the particular background of his home office that she'd been looking at via screen for 2 months. Full rebrand announcement, management transition, the workforce commitment, the whole picture. I've had our media team position it as a visionary acquisition story. Ambitious American company meets European industrial legacy combines strength-forward momentum. Your name is featured prominently. A pause. His is mentioned historically. Send it, she said. And make sure the severance package for his departure is complete full health coverage for 5 years pension at market rate. I want him to be taken care of. Felix looked at her from the couch. You continue to confound me. He spent 5 years making me feel like I should be grateful he tolerated me, she said. I'm not going to do that to anyone, not even him. The announcement ran in the business press the following morning and was received as Christian had predicted as a success story, an acquisition narrative, a case study in what strategic patience and industrial expertise could accomplish. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile on Isadora titled The Heir Who Built an Empire on Two Continents and the Marriage That Became a Masterclass in Strategic Patience. Forbes named her to their list of most impactful executives under 35. Time magazine ran a shorter piece, more personal, more interested in the story that she read once and declined to comment on. Ethan was mentioned in most of the coverage as a founder whose early vision had established the company's foundation. A few articles noted that his departure from day-to-day operations had been part of a planned transition to new strategic leadership. None of them mentioned Vienna. None of them needed to the footage existed had been seen by 47 million people and required no elaboration. She learned from industry contacts, begun consulting, helping other mid-sized manufacturing companies with operational efficiency, which suited his specific skills and did not require him to be the person in charge of the room. He had moved to a smaller apartment in Brooklyn. He had apparently started therapy. She heard this last part and felt something she identified after a moment's examination as genuine relief. Not for herself. She was past needing anything from Ethan Rourke's growth. But for him, for the simple human reason that people who did the work of understanding what they'd done wrong generally became less dangerous to the next person. That was worth something. That was worth more than most things, actually. They passed each other once completely by accident in the lobby of a building in Midtown where they both had separate meetings. He saw her first. She caught the freeze of his step from the corner of her eye, and by the time she turned fully toward him, he was standing very still and looking at her with the particular expression of a man who has been doing a great deal of thinking. She offered a professional nod, not warm, not cold, the acknowledgement you gave any acquaintance in the lobby of a building. He nodded back. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood waiting and felt in the interval between his recognition and the elevator's arrival exactly nothing that required management. No anger, no pain, no satisfaction, just the mild awareness of someone who used to matter and had become simply a person in the same city. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. That she thought as the doors closed was freedom. Not the dramatic version she'd been imagining in the restaurant and the private office and the Vienna library. Not a triumph or a reckoning or even a conclusion. Just the ordinary clean experience of encountering the past and finding it had no particular claim on the present. Just a woman stepping into an elevator going somewhere that mattered. A week after the lobby encounter, an unexpected visitor appeared at the Blackwell Vanguard offices, now operating under interim branding. The lobby signage changed the old logo stripped from the wall and not yet replaced. Isadora was reviewing the workforce program site selection report with Andrea Fisher when her assistant knocked and said with the careful neutrality of someone uncertain how to frame this, "There's a Miss Camille Ricci downstairs. She doesn't have an appointment. She says it's personal." Felix, who had been sitting on the office couch with his laptop, looked up instantly. Isadora considered for a moment. Then, "Send her up." Camille Ricci looked different from either Vienna or the viral video wearing jeans and a simple white sweater, her famous hair pulled back, almost no makeup. She stood in the doorway of the office with the particular posture of someone who had decided to do something difficult and was not going to back down from the difficulty. "I know I should have called," she said. "I tried the official channels. Your assistants are very thorough." "They are," Isadora agreed. "Sit down. Coffee." Camille sat on the edge of the chair the way people sat when they were prepared to leave quickly if necessary. I won't take much of your time. I just. She stopped, started again. I wanted to apologize, not the public apology. That was real, but it was also useful for me, which means it wasn't purely for you. This is just me saying sorry person to person. You don't owe me an apology. I know I don't technically, but I was part of something that hurt you even without knowing it, and I've spent 3 months thinking about it, and I wanted to say it directly. Isadora looked at her at the steadiness of her, the lack of performance, the clear-eyed quality of someone who had been through something disorienting and was finding out on the other side of it who they actually were. Where are you from originally? She asked. Sao Paulo. I came to New York at 17. A pause. You know what's funny, what I kept thinking after Vienna? I thought about how different we were and how the same thing happened to us both. He made you feel like you needed to hide, and he made me feel like I needed to be seen. Different mechanisms, same contempt underneath. She looked down at her hands. I grew up with nothing, Miss Voss Hartman. I came here because I was good looking, and someone told me that was worth something, and it was for a while. But it's not enough. It was never going to be enough. What do you want? Isadora asked. I want to go back to school, study something real business, maybe design, build something that belongs to me. She met Isadora's eyes. I need a job first, something that doesn't disappear when I age out of being the right look. I've been trying for months. I'm either the woman who destroyed Ethan Rourke's reputation, or I'm the woman too naive to know her boyfriend was married, and neither version of me gets a serious interview. The room was very quiet. Isadora looked at Felix, who gave her the expression of a man who had absolutely no opinion and also a great many opinions. What languages do you speak? Isadora asked. Portuguese and English, some Spanish. The Heartfelt Works program is expanding to 3 American cities this year. We need outreach coordinators, people who can connect with participants from immigrant communities who understand what it is to build something from nothing in a new place. She held Camille's eyes. It's entry level. The work is unglamorous and the hours are real. The pay is $55,000 with benefits and room to grow if you perform. Camille was very still. I'm not offering charity, Isadora said. If I bring you on, you earn every dollar. My program director will expect everything from you starting from day one. If that's not what you want. It is, Camille said. Her voice was steady. It absolutely is. Then HR will contact you tomorrow. Isadora stood extending her hand. Don't make me regret this. I'm taking a chance on you because I think you deserve one. Prove me right. Camille stood and shook her hand, grip firm, eyes bright without spilling. I will. I promise. After she left, Felix said without looking up from his laptop, You hired her. I gave her a chance. There's a difference. Mother is going to have thoughts. Mother can have all the thoughts she wants. Isadora sat back down and pulled the site selection report back toward her. Ethan spent 5 years making me feel like I should be grateful he tolerated me. I will not do that to someone else simply because I have the power to. Felix typed something, then, For the record, I think that's one of the best things you've ever done. She didn't respond, but she was very briefly smiling. The rebrand press conference happened on a Tuesday morning in late April in the glass-walled conference room on the 34th floor that had been rearranged to accommodate cameras and journalists and the specific performance of institutional confidence. Andrea Fisher spoke about operational strategy. Christian joined via video from Vienna to talk about the European integration. Isadora spoke last 5 minutes, prepared specific about what the company would become and what it would build and why it mattered beyond the balance sheet. She had been in front of rooms like this one in one form or another since she was 14 years old. The nervousness she'd felt then, the bright physical awareness of being assessed, had long since transmuted into something more useful, focus, precision. The particular attention of someone for whom the stakes were real. Afterward, a journalist from the Financial Times who had covered her family for 15 years found her in the corridor outside. Off the record, he said. She nodded. The Vienna footage, he said quietly. It went everywhere. And you were extraordinary in it. But there's a question I don't think anyone has asked you directly. Ask it. Was it worth it, the 5 years, the hiding, what you found at the end of it? She considered this seriously, the way she considered all questions that deserved it. I went looking for someone who could love me without the name, she said. I didn't find that. What I found instead was proof that I couldn't find myself by becoming someone else. That the name, the family, the work, it's not what I am in spite of. It's what I am. She paused. Would I do it again? A beat. No. But I'm grateful for what it taught me, and I'm grateful to be here building something that actually matters. She looked at him. That's not an answer for the article. I know. He smiled. It's a better answer than the ones I was expecting. She walked back into the room where her company was being announced to the world under her family's name, and she took her seat at the table and she looked at the cameras with the absolute unperformed certainty of a woman who knew exactly where she was and why she was there. That she thought was what 5 years had bought her, the understanding that she had never for a single moment been nothing. She had simply not yet known how to be everything she was. The formal succession announcement came on a Wednesday morning in September, 8 months after the gala delivered by the family council in the estate's great hall, with the precise ceremonial weight that 3 centuries of Voss Hartmann history had learned to apply to its most significant moments. Isadora stood between her brothers and listened to the council chair, old Benedict Frey, who had been serving the family in this capacity for 22 years, and who read each clause of the succession document with the unhurried certainty of someone for whom this was both professional duty and genuine satisfaction, and felt the words land one by one. Co-principal of Voss Hartmann Holdings, effective immediately. Full principal sole upon the retirement or abdication of the current principal, Marguerite Voss Hartmann. Voting authority over all family instruments. Primary strategic direction, international operations. Chairmanship of the Foundation Board. When Benedict finished reading, he looked up over his reading glasses with an expression that for him constituted warmth. The council votes unanimously in favor, he said. Welcome back, Miss Voss Hartmann. The applause in the great hall was the particular kind that meant something not polite, not performed, but the genuine sound of a room full of people who had been waiting for this and were relieved that it had arrived. Aunt Wilhelmina, seated in the front row, did not applaud, because applauding was not her register. She inclined her head instead once, with the gravity of someone issuing the only form of approval they considered meaningful. Afterward, in the quiet of the library, just the family, 4 of them around the low table with brandy and the fire going. Dominic raised his glass. To Isadora, he said, who left and came back different, and built something in the difference that none of the rest of us could have built without her. That's too generous, she said. It isn't. Christian, joining by video from Munich as he so often did, his image steady on the screen propped against the bookshelf. It's accurate. There's a distinction. Felix, who had been waiting with visible effort to say his piece, said, I would also like to note for the historical record that I am the only person in this family who watered her plants for 3 years and was never once officially thanked. You buried them, Isadora said. That's not watering. I watered them first. The burial was a consequence of the watering ceasing to produce results. He raised his own glass. I accept the role of unsung hero in this story. Marguerite, who had been quiet through all of this in the particular way she went quiet, when she was feeling something she had decided to feel privately, set down her glass and looked at her daughter. Your father would have been so proud of you, she said. And then, because she was Marguerite Voss Hartmann, and sentiment required an immediate rebalancing. Now, the Southeast Asian acquisition proposal needs your attention by Friday. I've put the files in the system. Felix looked at the ceiling. Remarkable, he said quietly. Just remarkable. But Isadora, looking at her mother's face in the firelight, the extraordinary precision of it. The thing behind the eyes that she understood now better than she ever had, the absolute love that expressed itself only in trust and expectation, because anything softer felt to Marguerite like not taking her daughter seriously felt nothing but gratitude. I'll have comments by Thursday, she said. Her mother smiled, the real one, the rare one. Good. The Singapore presentation was in October, a manufacturing summit that drew 3,000 industry leaders from 40 countries, and that the family had been sending representatives to for 11 years without ever sending Isadora, because for 6 of those years she had been absent, and for 5 of them she had been Elise Vale, and neither version had been available for this particular room. This year she stood on the stage and delivered the Voss-Hartmann Industrial America's Sustainability Roadmap, Heartfelt Works Expansion Timeline, the carbon neutrality commitments, the supply chain ethics framework she'd been developing with Andrea Fisher and her foundation board since spring, to an audience that received it with the attentive silence of people who recognized they were looking at something they would be citing in their own presentations for years. The questions afterward were precise and substantive. She answered all of them without notes. At the networking reception that followed, an older man found her by the window, distinguished perhaps 70, with the bearing of someone for whom several decades of important work had settled into comfortable certainty. He introduced himself as James Whitmore, a British industrialist who had been attending this summit since before Isadora was born. "I was at the Schönbrunn Gala in January, he said without preamble. "I saw what happened. I saw how you handled it both in the room and afterward." He paused. "I've been in this industry for 47 years. I've watched a great many people acquire power. What I don't often see is someone use it with the specific combination of intelligence and restraint, and I suppose the word is conscience, that I've watched you apply these past 8 months. She held his gaze without deflection. "Thank you." "I don't say it as flattery. I say it because it's rare, and rare things deserve to be named." He smiled genuinely, with the warmth of someone who had earned the right to mean it. "What you're building, the workforce initiatives, the sustainable supply chain, work. The way you've taken a company that was being run for one man's ego and redirected it towards something that actually serves the people involved in it. That's not just good business. That's the kind of thing that makes the next generation of people in this industry believe it's worth being in." She thought of the Heartfelt Works participants she'd met in Vienna the month before, 23 of them, first cohort, ranging from 19 to 51, every single one of them in a training placement at a Voss-Hartmann facility because someone had decided to build a door rather than maintain a wall. She thought of the 17 in the American program Felix had been overseeing in Cleveland, and the 12 Camille Ricci had personally recruited in Chicago by going to community centers on Saturday mornings and talking to people like a person rather than a program representative. "It matters to me that it's real," she said. "Not as a strategy, actually real." "I can tell." He extended his hand. "James Whitmore. And if you ever need an ally with 47 years of relationship capital and absolutely nothing to prove I'm available." She shook it. "I may take you up on that." Felix appeared at her elbow approximately 15 seconds after Whitmore had moved on with 2 glasses of champagne and the expression of someone who had been watching from a distance and found the proceedings satisfying. "He's one of the 3 most respected industrialists in the Commonwealth," Felix said quietly. "He's been on the G7 Manufacturing Advisory Panel for 9 years. I know who he is. Just checking." He handed her the champagne. "The Family Council voted this morning, by the way. The Southeast Asian acquisition, unanimous approval. Your proposal carried without a single amendment." She turned to look at him. "Your first major solo acquisition recommendation," he said, "approved in its entirety by the people who have been running this family's business for decades." He raised his glass. "How does it feel?" She considered the question honestly. "Like the beginning of something," she said. He smiled, the full, unguarded version, the one she'd been seeing her whole life, and had spent 5 years missing without quite admitting it. "Good," he said. "That's exactly what it is." The email arrived on a Thursday morning in November, 10 months after the gala, in the General Inquiries inbox for Voss-Hartmann Industrial Americas, which routed through her assistant who had been with Isadora for 3 months now, and had already developed an excellent instinct for what required attention and what required deletion. This one, her assistant forwarded with a brief note from Ethan Rourke. Subject line is, "Congratulations. I wasn't sure if you'd want this, but it felt like something you should decide for yourself." Isadora read it twice, standing at her desk in the New York office, looking out at the city, the way she'd looked out at it in the restaurant the night everything had started, except that she was not the same person in either the standing or the looking. "Isadora?" It began not Elise, she noted. Not Nora. Isadora. I saw the announcement about your formal appointment as co-principal of Voss Hartmann Holdings. Congratulations. I mean it without qualification, without any agenda, simply as a statement of fact about something that deserved to happen. I've spent the last 10 months doing something I should have spent the last 10 years doing, which is trying to understand who I actually am, rather than who I decided I needed to be. Therapy helps. Humility is harder, but also helps. I'm not writing to ask for anything or to excuse what I did. I'm writing because I needed you to know that I understand now what I failed to see when I had it. You were never boring. You were never ordinary. You were never the problem in a single moment of our marriage. The problem was entirely mine. The inability to value what I couldn't quantify, to see someone who didn't announce themselves to love a person who was simply and completely herself, rather than a performance of what I decided I needed. I'm sorry. Not because it changes anything, and not because I expect forgiveness, but because it's true, and you deserve to hear it. I hope what you're building brings you everything you wanted from it, and I hope genuinely that you find someone who sees you completely. You always deserved that. With respect, Ethan. She read it a third time, then she set the phone down and looked out the window for a long moment at New York, which was bright and cold and entirely indifferent, the way it always was, the way she had learned to find beautiful rather than impersonal. She didn't respond. Not because she was cold and not because she was still angry. She wasn't, she found still angry, which was its own discovery. But because some chapters genuinely didn't require epilogues, and because the closure she needed, she had already built herself piece by piece in the 8 months since she'd stood on the steps of Schloss Hartfeld in the first cold light of January and decided to come back to herself. She forwarded it to Felix with a single line. In case you wanted to know. His response came 17 minutes later. I'm glad he got there. Took him a while. But I'm glad. A pause. Then, how are you? She typed. Better than I've been in years, genuinely. He sent back a string of hearts which was very unlike him, and exactly right. A year after Vienna, Isadora received an unexpected phone call from Camille Ricci, not her assistant's inbox, but her direct line which Camille had used only twice before in the 6 months she'd been working in the American program. I wanted to tell you something, Camille said, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who had been preparing a sentence and had decided to simply say it. I've been in this job for 6 months. I've worked harder than I've worked for anything. And yesterday, Marcus, my program director, Marcus told me that I am the most effective community outreach person he's worked with in 11 years, and that the Chicago cohort's enrollment numbers are the highest the program has seen. I know, Isadora said. I read the report. Oh. A pause. Well, I wanted to say thank you, not for the job exactly, for taking me seriously when no one else would. Her voice was very steady. You didn't know me. You had every reason to be suspicious of me. You gave me a chance anyway because you thought I deserved one, and I just wanted you to know that it mattered, that it changed things. Isadora looked out her office window at New York glittering in the early evening light. You earned it, she said. Every day since you've earned it. Thank you for not making me regret it. Are you going to Vienna for the Schönbrunn Gala again this year? Camille asked. Yes. It's funny I almost went back to Vienna last month, just to see it without what happened being the only thing I associated it with. A pause. Is it a beautiful city, really, outside of ballrooms and crises? It's the most beautiful city I know, Isadora said simply. You should see it properly. The museum quarter in the morning, the Naschmarkt on a Saturday, the Prater in spring. She paused. Come in spring if you get the chance. I'll give you names of places to go. I'd like that, Ma, Camille said quietly. I'd really like that. 2 years after Vienna, the Schönbrunn Founders Gala opened its ballroom to its annual gathering of the people who shaped the industrial world, and Isadora Voss Hartmann stood in the same entrance she had stood in 12 months before and breathed the same cold January air and listened to the same orchestra warming up inside. This time, there was nothing to prove. No confrontation waiting, no hidden identity to reveal no careful drama timed for maximum impact. Just a woman attending an event she co-hosted surrounded by people she knew, wearing a dress she had chosen because she liked it. Midnight blue. This time not gold with different diamonds, the simpler strand she preferred for occasions that didn't require armor. She entered with her family, Marguerite and Dominic and Felix and Christian, who had flown in from Munich, and the room received them the way it always did, with the particular respectful attention that power attracted when it had been established long enough to feel inevitable. Felix found her an hour in dancing with the Austrian Minister of Economic Affairs, which he seemed to be finding amusing. He cut in with the minister's permission, and they moved through the waltz together, the way they had last year, her eyes closed for a bar or two, the music and the movement and the warm familiarity of her brother's company, doing what only a few things could do, dissolving time, returning her to the simplest version of what she was. 1 year, he said. 1 year. How does it feel? She thought about it, genuinely thought about it. About the restaurant and the envelope slid across white linen, about the phone call to her mother from Beaulieu's small office, about the convoy moving through Vienna in the January dark, about Ethan's face in the moment the recognition arrived about the divorce proceedings and the quiet Tuesday morning when it was done. About Hartfeld Works and the 23 people in the first cohort and the 40 in the second, about Camille Ricci and the Chicago Community Center on Saturday mornings, about her mother saying your father would have been so proud, about walking into an elevator in Midtown and feeling nothing in particular about the person in the lobby, about the FT journalist question and the answer she'd given, and meaning it. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, she said. Like I did something very difficult and came out the other side knowing something true. What's the true thing? She opened her eyes. The ballroom was exactly as it had been a year ago. The chandeliers, the marble, the music, the 500 people who moved the world. The same room where she had walked in afraid and stood her ground and found on the other side of the fear that she was still completely herself. That the only person who needed to believe in my worth, she said, was me. Felix was quiet for a moment. Then, that's worth everything you paid for it. Yes, she said, it is. The music swelled. The dancers turned. The chandeliers threw their ancient light across the floor, and in it Isadora Voss Hartmann moved through the room that had always been hers, not because of the name, not because of the inheritance, not because of the empire or the strategy or the 3 centuries of history she carried, but because she had finally completely chosen to be in it. She had been Elise once quiet and contained and desperately trying to earn something that was never on offer. She was Isadora now. Both names, both experiences, both versions folded into someone more complete than either had been alone. And if Ethan Rourke was somewhere in Brooklyn sitting with whatever understanding he was building toward, well, that was his story. His to live, his to work through, his to eventually arrive at, or not. Hers was here, was this, was the family and the work and the foundation and the program and the endless demanding, deeply satisfying business of building something that mattered. Hers was the room and the music and the long, clear knowledge of who she was. Years later, when journalists and interviewers asked about the Vienna incident, and they did because the footage remained and the story had become one of those reference points that people used when they wanted to talk about something larger than itself, she always gave the same answer. It taught me, she would say, that the right person doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller. They don't require you to hide or apologize for what you are or earn their attention by becoming someone easier to overlook. And if someone does require that of you, walking away is not weakness. It's the most complete act of self-knowledge you can perform. She never mentioned Ethan by name. She never went into the specific architecture of what had happened. Some things were private, sacred in the way that pain becomes sacred when it has done its work and been survived. But she also never pretended it hadn't shaped her. The Vienna Gala was part of her story. Not the defining moment, she refused to let it be the defining moment, but a turning point. The night between who she'd been trying to be and who she actually was. The night she stopped running in the wrong direction and turned finally toward herself. She had gone looking for love. She had found something harder and more durable, the knowledge that she was worth finding. And every morning after that, she built something that proved it not to him. not to anyone watching, but to the deep quiet part of herself that had spent 5 years in a gray dress in a borrowed life, waiting to be remembered. The rain that had fallen on that first night in Manhattan fell again somewhere as it always did. Somewhere a restaurant table held an envelope and a man's certainty and a woman who was about to say no for the first time in 5 years. But that woman was Isadora now, had always been Isadora. She just hadn't been ready to know it yet. She was ready now. She was home. 3 years after Vienna. Isadora stood on the stage at the World Industrial Leadership Forum in Zurich, the conference she had attended as a teenager, watching her mother deliver an address about European manufacturing supply chains, thinking it was the most boring thing she had ever witnessed, and later at 20 understanding that it was one of the most powerful rooms in the world. And she delivered the Voss-Hartmann 5-year strategic vision to an audience of 4,000 industry leaders from 52 countries. She spoke for 40 minutes. She had prepared for 3 weeks. She had also, in the week before the presentation, asked Felix to sit in on the rehearsal and tell her what was wrong with it. Not to be kind, but to be useful. And he had made 17 specific observations, 14 of which she had incorporated into the final draft, and 3 of which she had considered and decided were wrong, which she told him, and which he had accepted without argument because he understood the difference between helping and controlling. The presentation was well received. That was an understatement. The reception it generated in the room, in the applause and the quality of the questions, and the way people were already moving toward her before the formal session ended was the kind that marked a shift. A moment where the conversation about who was shaping the future of the industry had updated to include her name as a given. An older British industrialist she'd met at the Singapore summit 2 years before found her in the corridor after. "I told you I'd be here if you needed allies," James Whitmore said. "You didn't need any, but the offer remains." "I know," she said, "and I'm grateful for it. One question, if I may." He had the air of someone who had been waiting to ask it for some time. The Heartfelt Works program, 3 years and 3,000 participants, placed now operating in 7 countries. That's not a corporate social responsibility initiative anymore. That's a structural intervention in the labor market. He looked at her carefully. "Was that always what you intended, or did it become that?" "Both," she said honestly. "I knew what I wanted to build. I didn't fully know how large it could get until it started working." He nodded slowly. "Your father was like that," he said. "I knew him briefly. He came to this forum the year before he died. He had the same quality. He could see what something might become before it existed. He'd have been very proud of what you're doing." She held that for a moment. She had heard this from people who had known her father before, usually with the solemnity of people bestowing a gift they thought you needed. What was different about Whitmore was that he said it the way he said everything, as simple fact without expectation of gratitude for it. "Thank you," she said. "That means something." "It should," he smiled. "Carry on, Miss Voss-Hartmann. We're watching, and we're glad you're here." That evening, she called Felix from the hotel. He answered on the second ring from the estate, where he was apparently in the middle of a dinner that he described as technically casual but emotionally demanding, which she understood to mean he had invited the woman he'd been seeing for 4 months, and 3 members of their extended family had also shown up uninvited. "How did it go?" he said, stepping away from whatever room the noise was coming from. Well, how? Well, polite reception, and 3 good questions, well, or well, the room shifted and I could feel it, well. The second one, a beat. "Yes." His voice was warm. "That's how it's supposed to feel." A pause. "Are you all right?" "Not the presentation, you." "Are you all right?" She sat on the hotel bed and looked at the Zurich night through the window, the lake, and the lights, and the particular quality of a Swiss city at 10 p.m. Contained and certain and beautiful in the way of things that have been cared for over a very long time. "I'm genuinely all right," she said. "Not performing it." Not performing it. She thought about how to say what was true. "I think the last 3 years have been the most difficult and the most satisfying of my life. I think I understand now what work is supposed to feel like when it's real. Not the execution of expectation, the actual building of something that matters. Yes, I think I'm happy." A long pause. That's the first time you've said that in 3 years. I know. How does it feel to say it? She looked at the lake. True, she said. It feels true. The following spring, Hartfeld Works held its first formal graduation ceremony. A small event, 41 participants completing their certifications in the training facility attached to Voss Hartmann's Linz manufacturing plant. Isadora attended. She had been at every cohort intake day and every site visit and every program review meeting, but this was the first graduation, and she had cleared her schedule for it the moment the date was set. She sat in the third row and watched 41 people walk across a temporary stage and accept certificates and shake the hands of instructors who had taught them things that would last. She watched a 53-year-old Austrian man, former steel mill worker, the mill having closed 6 years ago. 2 years in the program, accept his certification in precision machining with an expression she would not forget. Not triumph, not relief, but the particular quality of a person who has been handed back something they thought was gone. She did not give a speech. She had considered it and decided against it because the day was not about her. Afterward, she talked to participants in groups of 2 and 3, asking about their placements, their plans, what had been hardest, what had surprised them. She listened more than she spoke. A young woman from Bratislava, 19 years old, first in her family to finish any certified training program, told her, "I didn't know this was possible for someone like me. I didn't know there was a door." "There are always doors," Isadora said. "Sometimes they're just not visible from where you're standing." The young woman looked at her with the direct assessing gaze of someone who had learned early that people said things they didn't mean and had developed a reliable mechanism for detecting the difference. "You actually believe that," she said, "not a question." "I do," Isadora said. "I spent 5 years not being able to see my own door, and then I found it, and everything on the other side of it was real." The young woman, her name was Clara Isadora, had read her file daughter of a Slovak mechanic and a Hungarian teacher, extraordinary aptitude for industrial systems design, considered this for a moment. Then she said, "What was on the other side?" Isadora smiled. "Everything I should have been all along," she said. "It was waiting. It just needed me to open the door." Clara nodded with the serious consideration of someone filing something away for later. "I'll remember that," she said. "Good." Isadora extended her hand. "Congratulations, Clara. I hope you build something extraordinary." On the drive back from Linz to Vienna, sitting in the back seat of the convoy, as the Austrian countryside moved past the window, in the last long light of a spring afternoon, Isadora thought about the shape of what she had become. Not the titles, though. The titles were real, and she had worked for them, and they meant something. Not the holdings, or the acquisitions, or the succession confirmation, or the press profiles that still occasionally referred to her as the heir who came home. Those were the surface. The record of things done, not the thing itself. What she had become was someone who had been lost and had found her way back not to the person she'd been before she left, but to a version of herself that contained the departure and the 5 years and the restaurant table and the gala and all of it integrated and resolved and built into her in the way that experience built into you when you let it. When you didn't spend your energy pretending it hadn't happened. She had been Elise Vale. That was real. Elise Vale was part of her, the woman who had loved honestly and been loved inadequately and had kept going anyway, who had said no in a restaurant when every instinct told her to fold, who had called her mother at midnight from a maitre d's office and begun the process of becoming whole. She had been Isadora Voss Hartmann before that, the carefully trained heir, the person shaped by legacy and expectation and the weight of a name who had run from that shaping because she didn't yet understand that you could be shaped and still be free. Now she was both, and she was someone else. A third version assembled from the first two that she was still discovering, and that was still becoming and would be becoming, she now understood for the rest of her life. That was not a problem. That was simply what living was, the continuous becoming of a person who had not yet seen all of who they would be. She looked out at the Austrian countryside and the spring light on the fields and the distant hills going blue at the edge of the visible world, and she felt with the clean and unremarkable certainty of something simply true. She was glad. Not triumphant, not vindicated, not relieved. Those things had all had their moments and passed through her on their way to wherever feelings went when they were finished. Just glad. Glad to be here in this car, on this road, heading toward this city with this name, with these people doing this work in this life. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The convoy turned toward Vienna, and the evening came in warm and gold over the hills, and Isadora Voss Hartmann went home. There were things she had learned over the 3 years that she would not have been able to learn any other way. She had learned that silence was not the same as peace, that the 5 years of making herself quiet and small had not been peaceful but simply deferred the feelings stored in a place she hadn't allowed herself to access until they were expressed for her in the form of a restaurant table and a man's absolute certainty that she was worth very little. She had learned that love without respect was not love, and that she had mistaken the presence of one for the presence of both. She had learned that the people who shaped you were not the same as the people who trapped you, and that confusing the two was a category error that cost years. She had learned that her mother loved her in the specific language of trust and expectation and the refusal to treat her as something fragile, and that this had never been the absence of tenderness, but a form of it, the particular tenderness of a person who believed in you enough to demand your best. She had learned from Camille Ricci that grace was not the absence of damage, but the choice made repeatedly and deliberately to act from somewhere better than the damage wanted you to act from. She had learned from Clara and the 40 others, and the hundreds who had come after them in the Heartfelt Works program, that the most powerful thing you could do with resources was not accumulate them, but redirect them toward the people for whom a door was not visible, toward the construction of doors where none had existed, toward the belief that human capacity was not a finite thing to be allocated among the already privileged, but a renewable resource waiting for infrastructure. And she had learned from the 3 years of building something real out of the wreckage of something false that purpose was not something you found. It was something you chose repeatedly in the small decisions and the large ones, in the way you used the day and the way you used the authority and the way you looked at the person across from you and decided whether they were fully human or merely useful. She had chosen purpose. Every morning, again, she chose it. That was enough. That was the whole lesson. She had gone into a restaurant on a rainy Manhattan evening, believing she was going to sign papers and walk away with $3 million and the freedom to disappear. Instead, she had walked away with herself. It was she had come to understand the most valuable thing she had ever been given, not by Ethan Rourke, who had tried to take it from her, but by the 5 years themselves, the long, educating work of discovering what she was, when she was stripped of everything except the choice of who to be next. She was Isadora. She was home. She was at last completely herself. And that all of that exactly was everything she had ever needed.